and begin the day. Welcome, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I thought maybe I'll quickly go through what we're going to be covering today. So I thought first of all we could have maybe a bit of a follow-on conversation from yesterday about the design methods, and then there's a little bit that really belongs with the forest gardening session, where I'll maybe talk about some of the plants you might consider choosing for a forest garden. And after that, after the break, we've got a session called Futures, which is looking about permaculture and how things might play out over the following years. And I've got a session called I can't remember what we called the session, but it's about kind of plant-based permaculture, thinking about obviously this is billed as a kind of vegan or plant-based permaculture course, but a lot of the content so far has been not particularly focused on plant-based, so it's a chance to maybe think about what that might mean, a plant-based sort of culture. So maybe we can have that as a bit of an open discussion, but with taking a few kind of notes and bits and pieces like that. And then hopefully, I always say this, but hopefully there'll be time at the end for people to have a chat about their design projects, maybe a small group thinking about their designs and where they're at. So that's the intent for today. Whether it will actually pan out like that, as usual, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, let's crack on with it. So first off, I thought it might be nice to maybe, it was getting a bit late in the day yesterday, and we talked through, I did that slideshow that was recapping a lot of the stuff we've already covered in terms of design methods, and then introduced a few others that people may or may not have come across before. And then the idea was that it was then going to be a bit of an open space for people to talk about their other design methods they might have come across or used, or how useful they found them and might like to share. And we did that to an extent, but I thought maybe we could spend 10 or 15 minutes following up that session and and see what comes out of it. So yeah, anybody like to do? I think most people, apart from Laura, were here yesterday, but it might still be useful just to do a quick recap. What were some of those design tools that we could put in the design toolbox? Can anyone recall any of them?
Mood boards was one of them, which is the most obvious, which it's probably the one I use the most when I'm thinking about a project. And there's lots of accessibility to mood board, from online things like Pinterest to pulling things out of magazines and sticking them in the scrapbook.
And how do you find that how do you find that useful?
I think it's getting the ideas. I mean, I suppose I use it for work quite a lot because my work's visual. So when you're kind of stuck for ideas, you're searching through what other people have done, and then you can take bits from, if you look at someone else's garden, you think actually that wall would look really good there, and then I can put that plant there. So it's just taking bits from sort of different things, and it might be a picture and just one thing there sort of triggers something in your mind that makes you think about a really good idea. So it is a really good, useful tool.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Yeah, and inspiration, I think, as well. Pinching other people and what has worked for other people, I think, is quite useful. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think there's sometimes this thinking in permaculture design, you've always got to be kind of innovative and kind of coming up with new ideas. Well, if this worked for someone else, just pinch their idea, why not? So yeah, definitely. So mood boards was one we covered as with the tool. Any others?
I don't know how much we talked about this yesterday, but just follows on from mood boards, is sort of doing that in the real world. Like I took the dog out this morning on a different walk through, there's like one path that runs right through all the allotments and the community gardens. And I just was sticking my hand through the fences and taking pictures of everything that looked interesting to bring home, and sort of really thinking about how that works. And I've got a friend taking me to a place called Ground House Sheppey, which is sort of they're trying to be permaculture based and sort of struggling between multiple businesses, but they've got eco buildings and they grow food and they work with volunteers. So I'm going to sort of pick their brains and take my drawings. So sort of trying to mood board with people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the reasons we get people to come, or I get people to come, you know, that are running projects, and, you know, whether it's like Ian down in South London or Paul in Nottingham, and, you know, because it's just interesting to hear how they, I kind of quite like it when they sort of contradict each other a bit as well. There's sort of Steph Hafferty, who's kind of full on, you know, never dig, it's all about the no digging. And then Ian Toll goes, well, I sort of dig a bit, you know? and so I actually hear those, you know, kind of maybe slightly contradictory ideas as well, because then you kind of realise nobody's got all the answers, and there are, you know, and it's, but everybody's got part of the answer, I think. So yeah, definitely.
I like the idea of going directly into nature and getting her ideas, because on the island where we're going to move, we took we took an ATV and we went up and into the bogs, and there's some plants there that I know I can get to bring to my little pond that is going to be regenerated. And there was also we during one of our walks came across a quarry, and it's not far from my home, and there's an apple tree that grows there, and it had the sweetest apples, and I don't know who planted it, but it's in a quarry, and it's probably a wild apple tree. So I collected seeds, and that I'm going to be planting those. So just getting ideas inspired by nature.
Definitely, yeah. Inspiration from nature, definitely, yeah.
I like to also get the answers from nature. So I find that if I have a problem and I'm confused, if I just go and spend quite a bit of time in a park or buy some trees and stuff, I actually ask for an answer, I get something. I know like lots of old indigenous cultures do that type of thing, but I find it quite useful, and I always get some sort of insight.
It's Janine Benyus. I've heard Janine Benyus, and she's involved with the bioregional movement, which is kind of obviously biomimicry. Biomimicry, which is kind of, as you say, Marcia, seeing what does nature, you know, actually adapting nature or the forms that occur in nature and adapting them to our designs. And Janine Benyus, her kind of question there is always, how would nature solve this problem? And, you know, just taking that as a starting point, you know, bioregional and biomimicry kind of generates all these different solutions. You always see biomimicry as, it's not quite the same as permaculture, but I always see it as kind of a complementary kind of design movement. So I think, yeah, biomimicry is worth having a look at. So definitely. Yeah. Any other design tools that people have got tucked away in their toolboxes?
I think the one I found most useful is the each element having multiple purposes, and then each element having multiple backups. So everything, and it's not the way I would have thought before doing this course at all. Everything was
taken as an individual thing. But it's been really useful, that even just a windbreak, right? What's it going to be? Yeah, how can it have more uses than that? And it's really helped kind of creative thinking. I think that's the thing that I've used most on my design and enjoyed thinking about.
Right. Carla?
One other thing, I don't really know what you call this, but like that I found interesting this week is putting my ideas out on my needs to like totally different people. Like I've put this idea of this studio I want to build out to an artist, an eco builder who's built this ground house sheppy, and also to our local builders that are like smashing the back of our house out and are very like concrete minded and are very happy to use concrete, and just sort of like trying to listen to both of them without immediately making a decision or a judgment, or also feeling the need to respond to them, and just like seeing what happens in the middle of that I found really interesting. So I don't know, seeking different opinions, and also opinions of sometimes people you think you wouldn't value necessarily, or they might not be immediately right.
Definitely, yeah. So it's kind of seeking kind of multiple viewpoints, I guess, isn't it? Really, yeah. Hey, Dagmar.
Sorry, me again. So,
Right.
when we were talking about the design tools yesterday, one that I actually found particularly interesting was McHarg's exclusion method, because obviously that's sort of turning everything on its upside down and looking at the problem or not, you know, in a different way. And that was, you know, to, you know, process of elimination, working out where not to put something, or where how not to do something, or, you know, by sort of looking at where things should be, or where other factors might be stopping you doing what you want or what you need to do. So yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting one that I've not necessarily thought of.
Yeah, so yeah, it was very useful using it in that little garden or the little courtyard I was talking about. You know, well, where instead of thinking where should we put these pots of plants, or where shouldn't we put them? You know, or where can't we put them? So, and what you're left with is the best place.
Seems a good way of getting a lot of people on board, because I think if people can see the reasons of the process, it's not just that you look like it's like an aesthetic place or whatever, that, that they'll understand, and when you've got a larger group, they'll take it on board better. Is that what you found, Graham?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was kind of quite a small self-selected group. It was only the people that actually attend the day centre, but yeah, it was, and it got people actually engaged in the process rather than people thinking, I could care less when we put the plants, you know. So it did engage people, and part of the whole point of doing that process was just getting people to be a bit more connected with that space. So it's people with learning disabilities largely are kind of quite used to not being empowered or involved in those sort of decisions. You know, people just come along and make those choices for people quite often. So it's just different ways of getting people actually engaged with the whole process, really. So, I mean, at the end of the day, there weren't that many options where to put the plants anyway, but at least we employed like a thinking process around it. So, yeah, definitely. I think a lot of these tools are about really, particularly the ones talked about, you know, that are more around kind of community or collective design, is about getting people actually engaged in the process, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we've recapped a few of the ones we covered yesterday and heard about a few more in there, but yeah, so I guess the takeaway is there's just a whole range of tools that we can be using, and we can pinch them from all, be a bit of a magpie and just pinch things from other disciplines and other design sort of schools of thought and stuff. There's just so many tools that we can use, I think, to help us, and then not getting too tied up. I think sometimes people kind of get a bit hung up on the tools themselves. Is this the right tool to use here? Am I using it properly? Am I following the rules properly? And really, it doesn't really matter. It's just using what works. When I think what's that saying that if you're too hung up on the tools you're using, you're kind of like you're looking at the finger that's pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. I think so. I think it's important to bear that in mind. Okay, so I'll leave that there. We've talked quite a bit about design tools now, I think, and I'll say hopefully I will let's get Joe to do a evening session on talking about some of the digital, and computer aided design tools that he's familiar with, which was a really interesting session. I'll let people know about that, but I'll move on for now. And so this kind of calls back a bit to the forest gardening sessions we did a couple of weekends ago, where talked a bit about what is a forest garden, and then we did the session talking about some of the considerations of designing a forest garden. So it's kind of adds on to that a bit, and it's just really looking at some of the trees, fruit trees and plants you might consider to putting in if you're doing a forest garden or any sort of edible gardening project. It's a bit of a kind of it started out as a top 10 of plants, but it turned into about the top 30 or something. But and again, people might have things they want to add on or things I can add. So I'll share the screen. So yeah, sort of fruits of the forest garden, a bit of a selection. This isn't obviously, it's a huge area to think about, and it's not going to be comprehensive or exhaustive, but it might be some of the things you might think about including in a forest garden. And we did the exercise, or we talked about, what are those design considerations, but didn't get too much into the specifics around the trees and plants themselves. I thought we'll look at a few. And we're also going to have a session with Mandy Barber, who runs a project called Incredible Vegetables. And her session is like looking at more depth, a lot of less usual perennial plants you might be thinking about using. But so this kind of maybe introduces her session a little bit, and she kind of goes into it in a little bit more depth about some of the more specialist plants. Anyway, fruits of the forest garden, a selection. And I think my number one, certainly in the UK, is the good old the trusty apple, which is a very very familiar plant in the UK. I guess it's like the cool temperate fruit in our at the moment, at any rate, our Britain's temperate climate means that we produce some of the best tasting apples in the world, and there's a real variety there, ranging things. Got Cox's orange pippins that have that kind of aromatic, rich, complex flavour. We've got Egremont russet, which has a kind of a sweeter, sharper, nutty kind of flavour. And I guess when I see the apple, it's almost celebration of kind of local distinctiveness in a way, and it symbolises, historically, it does symbolize, the apple symbolises our deep connections with our food growing past. So we've got the National Fruit Collection, which is located at Brogdale in Kent, near Faversham in Kent. They're actually growing species of some sort of that. I think it's 2,200 apple species, something like that. And they have a database that lists about 6,000 other varieties. And when you think, you know, if you go to your average supermarket, you'll see, you know, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, you know, varieties of apples. You know, very little choice. It'd be like, you know, your kind of your pink ladies, or your kind of golden delicious, your standard varieties. But actually, you know, historically, there are these thousands of very local varieties, and they'll have their own kind of history behind them. They'll have their own kind of traditions behind them. Essex, where I'm come from, around Chelmsford, there was Seabrooks, who were an apple breeder, and you know they bred kind of hundreds of varieties just local to kind of, you know, Essex, my sort of area. So we actually look at the potential of apples we could be growing. I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said for the apple, and certainly at the moment, you know, our climate conditions at the moment, they tend to be kind of reliable croppers. So to me, in the forest garden, I definitely, you know, for those kind of backbone trees, the things that are really giving it the its kind of form and structure, I think you can't really go wrong with the old traditional apple. So I guess, yeah, we all know about apples, and everybody's familiar with apples, and we've already talked about kind of rootstocks and the different, you know, that we can control their size, you know, the size of the trees. And we talked about grafting. We've talked a bit about propagation and stuff. But yeah, just wanted to kind of maybe give a shout out to the apple. And another one, obviously, that I guess we're all very familiar with is the pear, Pyrus communis. Which are apples we kind of graft onto the rootstocks of other apples. Generally, pears will be grafted onto quince rootstocks, which are quince are very closely related to pears. And because pears do tend to have a very kind of, they grow very big, basically, you know, just growing on their own rootstocks. They'll grow to absolutely massive and be far too large to be suitable for certainly most kind of back garden scale, or, you know, where space is limited. But by growing on quince rootstocks, we can actually have more control over the size and be growing kind of much more compact trees. So pears do tend to be, I mean, apples tend to just sort of have quite a long keeping season, whereas pears are a lot more kind of fragile. They don't keep as well. And I find they go through this stage, they're either too hard, you know, you can't really eat them because they're much too hard. Then suddenly they kind of turn and they're really kind of soft and they're edible for maybe a week or so, maybe a little bit longer, but then suddenly they kind of go off completely. So they don't have quite the same keeping qualities as apples. But I think they're another candidate for being kind of a core forest garden component. Yeah, please do, if anybody wants to kind of add anything or has any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt. I can't actually see whether people are putting their hands up at the moment, so just kind of interrupt if you want to add anything or have questions. So the next one, we talked about pears and cherries, of course, another forest garden favourite, I think. And again, there's lots of different types of cherries. We've got the these illustrated, you know, in the photo here. This was from a tree that I used to have in my garden, but it got too big and we had to cut it down, unfortunately. And this was a variety called Stella, which very reliable, always found a very reliable cropper. Very, very sweet, tasty cherries, very nice indeed. We used to get far too many and actually ended up giving loads away to our neighbours and friends and things like that. Again, cherries in their natural, natural growth form will quite often be too large for the smaller garden or where space is limited. But again, you can control the size with rootstocks. And I think one of the most common cherry rootstocks for growing dwarfing varieties is a rootstock called Colt, C-O-L-T. And so that means you can grow highly productive, yet still compact trees, about 15, that don't grow much larger than 15 to 20 feet, or even smaller if you're training them as pyramids. Yeah, I've also found in my group, this particular variety of cherry, Stella cherry, did very well in my back garden, but a couple of other places where I planted them, like in forest garden projects, in some of those community gardens that I've shown you pictures of, and on a couple of allotments and that, they haven't done so well because they don't get the kind of care and attention. The trouble is, a lot of in these kind of community spaces, there are times when they basically they're basically just left to their own devices, a lot of the trees and plants, and apples tend to just kind of get on with it. They don't seem to mind. Whereas I did find cherries, a couple of them don't do so well, and I've actually lost a few cherry trees that just haven't had, they've been not had the care and attention they require. So something to bear in mind if you're thinking about how much maintenance is your forest garden going to get. Say apples, they don't care, they just get on with it, whereas something's a little bit more fragile and delicate and maybe need that bit more care and attention. So it might be worth thinking about that.
Sorry, Graham. What kind of care do they need apart from water and?
Yeah, just basically, and grass can compete with them. And if they're kind of maybe, I'm just trying to think of
around the trees.
Yeah, so maybe a bit more mulching. Maybe it's hard to. Sometimes you don't really know what it is that's maybe killed the tree or making it, not do so well. But I guess factors would include, maybe it's not getting enough regular watering, maybe grasses and things like that are competing. Could be it's just getting too much exposure to, need more shelter, too much exposure to kind of wind and, yeah, I think I do require a bit more shelter. Like my back garden here is very sheltered. It's obviously built up all around it, whereas down the allotment, these very open spaces, things tend to be quite exposed to the elements. So, yeah, something to bear in mind, I think.
Do they need pruning as well? Or
yes, they will need pruning. Yeah, which haven't really got time to go into the pruning regimes, but yeah, they do need pruning. And they tend to need summer pruning rather than winter pruning like that. Yeah, that's something I probably should have said. But I guess all of these I'm talking about here will need, there are arguments, there are debates about whether to prune trees or just let them find their own natural form. I used to always, my good friend Ron, who has a forest garden right next to my forest, on an allotment, and his thing is always to leave trees to find their natural form. Whereas I kind of think actually no tree really has a natural form because they're all growing from grafts. So they've been, right from when they're propagated. It's kind of not, You know, they're not actually following their natural form. So I think, yeah, I mean, there's a story about people heard of Masanobu Fukuoka, who was the who wrote a very famous book called I can't remember what it's called, The One Straw Revolution, and very much kind of proponent of kind of natural farming, natural growing, a whole load of stuff, that a whole load of his ideas. One thing, he actually inherited a called it an orchard of orange trees, and this is in Japan. He inherited this orchard of orange trees from his grandfather, from his father, who had always pruned, maintained these trees by pruning them. And Fukuoka had this idea of let the trees find their natural form, but of course they've been pruned all their life. They didn't do well at all, and they just became, because he just let them, he stopped pruning, and so the trees just became tangled and they cropped badly, and I think most of them died in the end. And so for him, there was a lesson there about you can't suddenly withdraw this kind of pruning. Anyway, I've gone down a slight side alley there to your question, but yeah, I think by and large, I would argue that it is good practice to prune fruit trees for, so they'll be suitable for the space they're in, so they don't grow too big, so they don't get too congested, and to optimise the size of the fruit. My friend Ron, like I say, who used to argue that not to prune, he would get lots and lots and lots of apples. He would get more apples than me, but they were always a lot smaller and not that, bit kind of, very difficult to harvest that many apples. It's quite, I'd rather have, 10 good sized apples rather than 30 tiny little fruits that, are very difficult to harvest and very difficult to kind of process into, if you're making them into pies or whatever you're doing with them, so there's no right or wrong, but I would say by and large, yeah, cherries would need pruning. So, and that you would prune more in the summer months rather than the winter as well. All the stone fruits, which is cherries, plums, those kind of things, yeah, they don't like being, or it's not really good practice to prune them in the winter when it might be a good time to prune apples, because what will happen, the trees become more disease prone, and it's easier for disease to invade the pruning cuts and stuff like that. So something to bear in mind there. Okay, so that's cherries and plums.
Sorry, just a real quick question, because you said you'd cut down one of your cherry trees because it got too big.
Yes.
This might have a much longer answer, and you can.
Oh, sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
But how do you make the decision whether to? How do you decide whether to take down a tree or not? Because I have 4 very large trees and 1 very large dead tree that probably take up about 35% of the garden.
Okay.
So it's hard to know.
It is hard to know, and I think as ever, it's that old permaculture answer. It depends. For us, it was very, there were a lot of factors involved, really. A large one, really, this tree was just getting kind of bigger and bigger. I think it had actually, what had happened, like I say, it's important. I think we talked about this, that when you plant a grafted tree, it's very important that the graft is above soil level. Otherwise, the tree will throw out roots from the scion, the top part of the tree. And I think that's what, even though we planted below, did plant it in the right way, but I think over time, either the tree kind of sunk or the soil has risen and it did start rooting from the top part. And so, even though we were pruning it on a fairly regular basis, it was just getting bigger and bigger, really. And we have got a very small garden. It's about 30 foot by 15 foot or something. And So it wasn't an easy decision, and we put off making a decision for a long time about it. I think what it was really about, I think it was just because we wanted more space to kind of just be sitting in the garden and relaxing, basically. And yeah, there were a few, some of them are quite mundane. Might sound terrible to say this, but there were a lot of fruit that was high up in the tree that we couldn't reach. And what would happen was that the birds would get it and they'd eat the fruit, and all their kind of droppings and all the juice and the fruit would all drop onto our washing, basically, on the washing line. So it's just, and we couldn't sort of sit out in the garden and have a glass of wine without kind of like cherries dropping on you, half a cherry dropping on your head, and so there were quite a lot of factors really. So, and we didn't really want to cut it down, but it was just too big for the space. I could you can't really see my garden from. I can quickly point this out the window. And you can see a bit of our garden, but you can get a sense of the size of it, perhaps. So I don't know if you can see that, but it is very small. You can see our neighbour's garden there. You can get a sense of the size, and this is our one. You can't
I think
really
you
see
need to
most.
point it down a little bit because your name's
Sorry.
in the way. Yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
right. Okay.
Right, yeah, with you.
So you can see. Probably I can't actually see what you can see at the moment. It's
Yeah, you get a
Yeah, you can.
sense in your side and their side.
yeah, and you can probably see the apple trees that are there. They do okay. So yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, okay. I think I've got to live with it for a bit and then let them.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think there are so many factors. It just sort of didn't work for it was great when we first moved in and everything, but it just got too big. We're talking about after 25, 30 years sort of thing. So
Okay, thank you.
okay. And plums, I think again another stone fruit. And again, there's lots and lots of different varieties of plums. Very diversity of flavours, shapes, colours, sizes, and usually they'll be grown on rootstocks. St Julian and Pixie are the two main plum rootstocks. There's lots of others as well. So they produce smaller trees, the mature height about 10 to 15 feet. And they can also be grown on wild. They do quite well being grafted onto wild plum rootstocks as well, although they will tend to be a bit too large and vigorous for a smaller garden. And got a few varieties here. Victoria, obviously, I guess most people are familiar with Victoria plum. Purple Pershore, Laxtons, all kinds of plums that we can, again, another core forest garden, for the tree layer, the tree level, or smaller tree level. I think plums are another sort of classic. I'm talking about ones that are probably quite common and quite familiar at the moment. We'll maybe talk about some less familiar ones a little further down. And quince that I already mentioned. Again, quince has very high levels of pectin, so it can be good for adding to, for making jams and things like that with fruits that are low in pectin. It can be useful to add quince. And makes very nice jelly as well. I make quince jelly, which is very tasty. And again, makes a good root, or it provides a rootstock for growing our pears, which are closely related to. So yeah, I've had some good experience growing quince. Again, you probably wouldn't want too many quinces. So don't think you'd put. I mean, this is all down to personal taste. It might be, you don't like apples much, but you love quinces. So, but by and large, I'll say people don't tend to consume as many quinces as they do apples. So you might include a quince or two, but probably wouldn't be one of your core plants, I would guess. And yeah, maybe moving down more to our shrub layer, some of our currants and berries and soft fruits. So things you might consider climbers, such as grapes, which do tend to do well. They do need a lot of sun, grapes. So you wouldn't, they might be kind of more on the edges, on the sunny edge of a forest garden. But loganberries, another kind of climber, and blackberries, black currants, all kinds of currants and fruits you could be incorporating into the shrub layer. Blackberries obviously might be a bit vigorous for the many people's situation. You think bramble actually can be very invasive. So I think if you're thinking about deliberately incorporating blackberries, might be a kind of bit of a, because they're so vigorous and so invasive, might not be a good choice. But you can actually get hybrid blackberries that are actually thornless and a lot less vigorous. So I've got a couple of those growing on my allotment, and they always do quite well. Black currants and red currants, very high in vitamin C, so again, very useful. And let's just look at what else I've got in the currants and berries thinking here. So josterberry, I don't know if people are familiar with josterberry. These do very well. They're actually a cross between a gooseberry and blackcurrant, and they tend to have much larger berries. So if you harvest them early, they're kind of more like gooseberries. They're quite kind of sour, and you'd use them the same way you might use gooseberries. But if you let them grow on and ripen up, they're more like black currants. As I say, they do tend to be a lot larger than black currants, which makes them a lot easier to harvest, basically. And if you're making them into jams or jellies or anything like that, a lot easier to process, because I think traditional black currants can be quite fiddly to deal with, I think. And also very easy to propagate, I find, as well. If you just take cuttings from josterberries and just put them in some, a pot or a container of kind of sandy compost, 90% of them will root, whereas black currants aren't quite so reliable at propagating. Sometimes I've even, left cuttings on the ground of josterberries, and they've just kind of rooted into the ground with no sort of care and attention at all. So, I actually prefer them in a way to black currants, because they're actually, like I say, they're larger. They seem to require less attention, easier to propagate, and easier to deal, process into jams or whatever you want to do with them. So josterberries and worcesterberries, which are another cross between gooseberry and blackcurrant, but they tend to have these very spiky thorns. You can see the thorn there. So they can be quite good for planting around other crops to kind of help protect them. One of the very first forest gardens I ever visited was in North London. It was actually planted on public land next to this kids' sports ground place, where kids would play basketball and things like that. And what the kids would do, they'd kick their ball into the forest garden area, or they'd run into the forest garden area and basically, I wouldn't say vandalise it, but they wouldn't be, they're just playing there and, crashing about and that. And so what they'd done in this forest, around the kind of more valuable trees, if you like, the apple trees and things like that they planted that were young and getting established, they planted worcesterberries all the way around. because they're so kind of thorny and spiny, it prevented like kids from getting to the apples and stuff, and gave them a lot of protection. So yeah, Worcester berries might be another thing you might want to consider in those sort of situations, almost like a nurse crop, to actually protect, or nurse plant to protect some of those more delicate plants that are in there. And loganberries, another climber, again a cross between raspberry and blackberry. Again, heavy croppers, if you've got a fence or something like that, they'll cover a fence, or you can grow them up trellis or something like that. Again, very high in vitamin C and things like that. So definitely go for loganberries. And again, I find them personally easier to grow and maintain than I do raspberries, basically. So I find them a lot easier. So they've got that, some of the characteristics of blackberry, but they're not as vigorous and invasive, and they don't have the spiny, the spikes of bramble either. So yeah, I definitely recommend loganberry, in your climbing layer of a forest garden. And just checking the time, that's good. And maybe some slightly less usual ones now. Got the Juneberry, which to try and find it in my notes here. Yeah, I don't know if people are familiar with Juneberry. That's kind of sweet. Irene, your way, do you want to tell us about Juneberries?
It grows everywhere. It's a natural forest tree here, and the birds love them. People love them. We call it a service berry also, because here they were they would flower during when someone died. And they would flower during the springtime when they would take people out of the crypts, so to actually bury them. So they're called service berry.
Oh, is that what they're called? That okay. Yeah, so they're not a native in the UK, so they're a bit more of a, for us in the UK, they're more of an exotic, I guess, and not as commonly grown. You'll see them quite often grown in parks or grown as ornamental specimens. They're not normally grown actually for their fruit in the UK. They're not really known for it in the UK. So they're more, I guess, what I would call more of a kind of in the UK, more of a marginal species. So I guess the ones I've talked about already, are apples, pears, cherries, plums. We all kind of know those trees, and we know they're kind of fairly reliable, and you'll get kind of crops, and you either know whether you like a pear or an apple, or you don't like a pear or an apple. So the ones I'm talking about now, particularly in UK context, are things that may be moving away from those well-known crops to sort of some things that are a little bit more kind of, for us, a bit more exotic. So, yeah, and so yeah, I think you talked us through the Juneberry, Irene. I've never personally grown it, but I've seen it in parks and gardens and places like that, and I've harvested the berries, and they're quite a small berry, but they are, as you say, very very popular with both animals and humans. They tend to be kind of quite sweet, I think, and
they're very sweet, very, very sweet, and the flowers are beautiful. You can eat the flowers as well.
Yeah. So they're definitely one, if you're looking to include some things that are a bit less usual than your apples and pears and cherries, Juneberry might be one for thinking about. And the American, sorry, was that a question?
Oh no, it's just it's Dagmar. The council, we have a street trees for living scheme here, and so the council have planted an Amelantia in front of my house. I wonder if it's the same one. I've never known. Does have beautiful flowers, I've never noticed a berry, so I'm going to go out there and next time and see actually whether it might be a similar species and whether the berries might actually be edible.
Well, it could be the birds getting them first. If they're
Very
not
possible, yeah.
breeds, they're very popular with the birds, so they might just be stripping them before.
Before we get a chance to see.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing, if you are growing them with the hope of getting a crop, they do need some degree of protection, I think. So
Netting.
you might need to net them or something like that.
Okay.
Oh, and interesting, they're called the Juneberry, but the fruit actually ripens in July, which is another, according to my notes here. So,
And I haven't
I think
noticed
it's
that
because of the flowering time.
yeah.
Flowers.
Yeah, it's probably different in different, maybe your part of the world, it's different time, Irene. But I think in the UK, it's around about middle of July, they'll ripen up.
Yeah. You get flowers in the spring, it's kind of a spring flower. And then...
Yeah. I suppose just because Juneberry, you think, oh, it's the berry's going to be ripe in June, but it's actually July. According to my notes here, which are from Plants for a Future. So. Okay, and the American hawthorn. I guess people are very familiar with the hawthorn, Crataegus species, and I think talked about it as it's very popular as a hedging plant. I mean, you'll just see it everywhere in the UK, sort of grown as hedging around field boundaries or whatever. And you may remember I recommended it. If you're establishing a forest garden and you need to create a shelter belt, common hawthorn would be like a number one choice of plant for hedging. And the common hawthorn does have a berry that you can, the fruit that you can process into kind of jellies and jams and that kind. It's quite sour. And it's not particularly exciting berry on its own, but it can be processed into kind of hawthorn berry jelly, things like that. But the American hawthorn actually has a much larger berry, which Crataegus arnoldiana, I think that's pronounced, and this actually has a much larger sweet berry that you can actually harvest as a fruit. So yeah, the fruit is actually the size of a large cherry and is said to have, I've never actually had it myself, a delicious sweet flavour and ripens in August. Again, I have to talk about my personal experience here, that I actually bought an American hawthorn tree, maiden tree from Plants for Future about 15 years ago, I think, and I planted it on my allotment where there's a forest garden, and in 15 years it's never had a single fruit on it. I've never ever seen a fruit on it, and again it grew. It probably outgrew the space a bit, so I ended up cutting that down. But I didn't remove it; I cut it down, and so it's coppice, so it regrows from its base every year, and it's a very vigorous plant. As I say, I've never had a single fruit on it, so I'm a bit reluctant to recommend it. But again, if you want to experiment, you might have different results to me, and it'd be good to hear from someone that's successfully grown American hawthorn. So I've got it on my list of things might be useful to experiment with, but in my particular case, I've never had any. The tree's done well, but it's never had any fruit on it. It has flowers, but never. Could be that maybe
the right insects here, or you maybe need to get out there with a paintbrush, Graham.
Yeah, could be something like that.
It would be weird. Does it have flowers?
Yeah, it has flowers, but it never, it looks like they don't. Don't. It could well be they just don't pollinate, maybe. But I have there is in the hedgerow that's at the back, that's been there for many years since before I was there. There's actually a hedgerow around the site. There's hawthorn in that, so maybe you would have thought they would cross pollinate with each other, but I don't know why. I've never had.
Can I just ask, Graham? I mean, the book is absolutely brilliant. I got it secondhand. It's really, really good. Do they still sell from? Because they've got land down in Cornwall or something, haven't they? Can you actually buy plants from them, like mail order?
I don't think they do anymore, mail
Right.
order. They used to, but I think that they just couldn't.
Right.
Their thing is more about the research, I think.
Yeah.
And I think they try to sort of diverse. I mean, in their earlier days, they did used to run a little mail order thing, which when I got it, I think they've sort of packed it in now. I think they found it wasn't. They just didn't have the logistics to sort of run it as a commercial nursery as well, sort of thing. So
Yeah. Thanks.
Just a little side note on hawthorn. I don't know anything about the American one, but I harvest, we've got hawthorn everywhere here, and I harvest the berries for elixirs and I dry them for tea as well. And they're really good. I mean, read up on it in case it doesn't work for you, but they're really good for the heart. For lots of different things. So it's something I really, really like, and I'm really happy that people plant them everywhere for hedges, because then I can take from them.
yeah.
They grow wild here as well. They're just like the Juneberry, and they are delicious also, and we fight with them for the birds.
Yeah, I'll keep going. So again, that one might be good for experimenting with, but my own personal experience hasn't been that great with the American hawthorn. Not as a fruit crop anyway. And Cornelian cherry, again, deciduous shrub that can reach 5 meters or more in height. Very wind tolerant, again, useful as a hedging plant, and produces yellow flowers, and these ripen in sort of early spring. Sorry, they produce the flowers in early spring, and they ripen kind of late summer. Again, maybe a bit of a marginal one. They must be fully ripe, or else they're kind of very astringent. So in terms of growing for a fruit, an edible crop, possibly, one for experimenting with, I think. But and it is, Cornus mass is a very common kind of garden plant. It's grown, dogwood, it's grown as, an ornamental quite often. But it does have, potential as an edible. But I think, again, it's more of a kind of a marginal one to kind of maybe experiment with, rather than be your main source of kind of fruit on production. But there may be I think there's also something to be said for, there's kind of niches there for actually growing less usual fruit crops and things like that. But in terms of it being reliable, I don't know. Has anyone else had experience with Cornelian cherry as an edible crop? I see lots of heads shaking, and nobody's enthusiastic saying, "Yeah, I've grown them. They're great." So I'll move on. And the Elaeagnus species. So there are many varieties of Elaeagnus that bear. It's a fruit-bearing shrub, and can be very useful in a forest garden because of its nitrogen fixing properties. So, as talked about in the forest garden design session, it's useful to think about incorporating plants that are going to help maintain nitrogen, help maintain fertility. So Elaeagnus, I think, is useful primarily as a nitrogen fixer, but it does have these edible berries, and they crop. This is Eleagnus ebbingii, Ebbingei. Very common hedging plant. You see it growing all over the place. You see it a lot in kind of what I call municipal plantings, you know, where the council will put in shrubs around kind of car parks, around supermarkets, and places like, you know, where they've landscaped the car park or the supermarket. You'll very often see Eleagnus growing there as, you know, one of the plants of choice that, you know, councils put in and people like that. So apparently, you know, these are very, very nutritious, these berries, and it crops really, really early in the year. I think earlier than, it's the earliest fruiting crop in the UK, I think about April time. And it actually had inside you've probably all seen these berries growing on these plants. They had this red berry, and it's kind of covered with this kind of silvery kind of lattice. I don't know if that's familiar to people. Oh, that one down the bottom there, you can see it quite clearly. The red berry with these little silvery spots on. And it actually has a seed which is very rich in kind of useful fats. And so it can be, you know, sort of like cold pressed. You can get an oil from it that's very kind of said to be very nutritious. Ken Fern of Plants for a Future, he really raves about Eleagnus. I think, you know, he just writes, he gets so enthusiastic about them. Others found them not that exciting, really. They don't do much for me as a fruit, but I understand they are, you know, say they're very nutritious, but maybe not that exciting to just eat. So maybe a thing that can be processed, you know, for its oils or used in other ways. So, but yeah, primarily as a nitrogen fixer, it definitely has a place, I think, in the forest garden. Yeah, and anyone else grown Eleagnus or know about Eleagnus?
It's called the Russian olive, I think.
Russian olive, yeah, I think that's looking at my notes. Yeah, that is, yeah, there's Russian olive. I'm not sure if that's the same as Ebbingei, but there's lots of different varieties of Eleagnus. So we've got Russian olive and several other varieties as well. And anything else to say about them? Yeah, I'll move on because if you want to know more about Eleagnus, probably check out Plants for a Future. Give you a lot more information. As in the case of all of these plants, really, if you want to take a deeper dive, Plants for a Future is the place, I think. And again, goji berry, wolfberry, Lycium barbarum. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Again, it's one of these. I think goji berry. It's a bit of a kind of fashionable crop in some ways. It's kind of some people consider it what they call a superfood. You know, so it's super nutritious and super good for you. I think most fruits and superfoods, really, personally. So never quite sure what they mean by superfood, but yeah, it's interesting because it is actually kind of quite expensive to buy goji berries. You can buy them kind of dried from like health food shops and places like that. But they are actually quite easy to establish. I believe I've never actually grown them myself, but my understanding is they're actually quite easy to grow, and you can just take cuttings, put them in, and they'll take quite easily, and they'll produce a shrub that grows to about 3 meters in height, and the young shoots and leaves are also edible and might be cooked as a vegetable. And it's said to have, I've never tried them myself, but it's said to have a kind of a minty cress flavour. Has anyone grown goji berries? Okay, so I'll whiz through these. Japanese wine berries, another one that's kind of similar in habit to raspberries. It's a climbing plant, deciduous shrub, can grow up to 3 meters tall. So it's a biennial. It has a biennial growth habit. New stems are produced every year, flower in their second year, and then they kind of die off after that. But once they're established, you should be able to get regular fruit from them. And so it's a very good climber. So I've planted some next to my shed on my allotment, and I'm hoping they'll kind of grow over that and be a climber and use that niche to produce some Japanese wine berries. They were the favourite of Robert Hart, who's the forest garden pioneer who talked about when we did the forest gardening session. There's nice little video of him actually on YouTube. If you look up Robert Hart forest gardening on YouTube, there's a little bit of film where he's talking about Japanese wine berries and how you can make wine from them. Hence, there's a clue in the name there. But another one you might want to, a less usual crop that we don't come across so often, good for the forest garden in the climbing layer and ground cover as well.
We have this plant growing naturally. I don't know if it's the same type, but it's on Newfoundland Island.
Okay.
And they have a lot of recipes there. It's very famous for that.
All right, yeah. So I don't think it's native it's not native in the UK, but I think so maybe where you are, maybe it's more naturalized. Mulberries, again, quite a common tree in kind of parks and public gardens and places like that. Easy to grow tree that produces crops of long blackberry-like fruits of good flavour. Say widely used in pies, tarts, wines, cordials, and that kind of thing. And actually native to Southwest Asia. The black mulberry is native to Southwest Asia, and the red mulberry is native to Eastern North America, and they used to have the strongest flavours. They tend not to be. They crop well. They tend not to be kind of harvested and sold because they're such fragile fruit. They're very, very difficult to kind of harvest, transport and store. They tend to, because they're so soft, they just basically fall apart. So, that's why you can't really buy mulberries. You can't go down to the greengrocers and buy a punnet of mulberries by and large because they just don't transport very well. But if you've got one in your garden, might be worth putting in a forest garden to have a mulberry just for that kind of the novelty of a crop that you're not going to be able to buy anywhere else, basically. And yeah, very, very tasty. Like mulberries, I tend to get them. I haven't got one growing myself, but I know a couple of trees in local parks where we'll go and harvest some sometimes. And sea buckthorn, another nitrogen fixer, a deciduous shrub that produces these small orange berries. Have got they're very sharp, got a very sharp kind of lemony flavour. If you eat one raw, it'll really kind of set your teeth on edge. Very nutritious, said to have cancer-fighting properties, but yeah, I say said to have. I'm not saying that's a thing, but it suckers freely. And so not really suitable for somewhere where space is at a premium because they tend to be they can be kind of quite invasive. But there might be a good one for incorporating around hedging, into your hedging, the shelter belt. Certainly here in South, they're very, there's a clue in the name there, sea buckthorn. They like kind of maritime coastal conditions, very tolerant of like salty winds and things like that. And so very useful maybe as a windbreak in a maritime area, and say Southend-on-Sea where I live. There are a few places where you see sea buckthorn planted as like a hedge, including along Southend seafront. We've got like amusement arcades. It's like a little kind of amusement rides park in on Southend seafront, and it's got sea buckthorn planted all the way around that. And sometimes people think you're a bit weird if you're down there picking all the fruit on the seafront. So it's not really. It's grown as a hedging plant in the UK, but it's not really by and large grown for its fruit. But in other parts of the world, I think it's actually, it's very, 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 very sharp and lemony, and not that palatable to kind of, maybe our UK tastes. But I think in other parts of the world, it's actually used as a basis for like a cordial or a fruit drink that's sold commercially. So again, I think a plant that might be suitable for some forest garden situations, that has a lot of potential that's currently maybe not really been explored that much. How are we doing for time? Okay, I'll better get through the last few of these. And Chinese bramble, rubus tricolour, again, very good as a ground cover crop, actually. If you're wanting a reliable ground cover that's quick to establish and will cover the soil to prevent kind of competitive weeds and things like that from coming up. Chinese bramble. Martin Crawford of the Agroforestry Research Trust, he uses a lot of rubus tricolour or Chinese bramble as ground cover. And it does have these little raspberry-like fruits here, so you do actually get a crop as well, but its principal use really is sort of as a ground cover. Once it's established, it will spread quite rapidly. It propagates itself easily. It throws out kind of runners, and the runners will root, and you'll get, you can then dig up those new plants and plant them on. So very easy to propagate and reproduce. So I definitely recommend Chinese bramble or rubus tricolour as a forest garden ground cover crop that you get a fruit from as well. And has this very attractive, or I think so, very attractive kind of shiny leaves. And now some more, we're on the kind of ground cover layer now, I think, of the forest garden. So lemon balm, and the mint family in general as well. But I guess a lot of people are going to be familiar with lemon balm. I plant a lot of it around in sort of like, the community forest gardens I'm involved with, basically because it spreads all over the place. I mean, a lot of plants that a lot of conventional gardeners will steer well clear of because they consider them invasive. That's actually, I think, a plus quite often in you're looking for kind of forest garden ground covers. I like lemon balm. It has medicinal properties. The leaves are kind of edible. You can put them in, wouldn't put too many in, but you can use them to kind of flavour salads. You can make a tea from them. Just pick some leaves, pour on hot water. You've got an infusion. You've got this refreshing, and I think it's said to be relaxing kind of drink as well, or tea. Good for the wildlife. They attract bee. Another common name of lemon balm is bee balm because it attracts bees. Can't get enough of lemon balm personally.
Graham, do you reckon it'll be all right in a pot?
Yeah, it'll do all right in a pot. A large pot, quite a large pot, I would think. Again, like mints, it can be invasive and it can outcompete other plants. So it might be, if you're kind of a bit worried about that and you don't want the roots to spread, you could always plant put some in a pot and then put the pot in the ground, and hopefully it will kind of stay where you put it rather than spreading. But personally, I'm happy for it to spread all over the place because, you know, it's a low maintenance ground cover. And a couple more. Another one, Sweet Sicily. I think another one for the ground cover or maybe herbaceous layer of a forest garden. Got quite a, it's got quite a, well, including the name, it's got quite a sweet flavour to the leaves, and I think you can kind of chop the leaf if you're cooking rhubarb, which tends to be very tart and quite you know, if you want to reduce the tartness of the rhubarb, if you add some sweet cicely leaves, that will, you know, take the edge off the rhubarb, and then you don't add quite so much sugar to kind of take the edge off. Again, it will basically look after itself, dies right back in the winter, disappears in the winter, but comes back the following spring, very, very vigorous. It will self-seed all over the place, so it can be quite invasive. But again, that could be a positive, because then you can just, it self-sows, you get the sweet cicely plants coming up all over the place. You can just dig them up and go and plant them somewhere else and add them to, you know, someone else's forest garden, or there might even be a market there for selling sweet cicely. And three-cornered leek is another one that's a real favourite of mine, but a lot of people will curse three corners because it is incredibly vigorous and can be very invasive. And I actually introduced in my back garden that you just saw through the window there, somebody gave me like a three-cornered leek, I'd say about 15, maybe a bit even longer ago than that, about 15, 20 years ago. And I planted it in the corner, and it just spreads everywhere. It just totally very, very vigorous and very, very invasive. But again, I actually see that as a positive because it covers a lot of ground, doesn't need any looking after, just gets on with it. And if it is, it's very easy to pull out as well, or in my experience, it's very easy to pull out as well. So you just pull loads of it up and just add it to the compost. So you've got this instant compost material as well. Very seasonal. It's coming up in our garden now. I can see it coming up, starting to spread already. It's been going for a few weeks already in our garden. So it'll grow from now to kind of, it starts dying off around about late May, June, and by July there'll be no sign of it. It's completely disappeared. You know, you'll find the bulbs under the ground, but in terms of the actual foliage, it's completely disappeared by kind of late May, early June. So all parts are edible. You can, obviously the green foliage, it's got kind of a mild garlic flavour, so it's very good for places where you might, you know, things you might use garlic. The flowers are very kind of ornamental, I think. You can eat the flowers as well, so they make a nice garnish. If you're doing like a spring salad, you can pick a few of the flowers and sprinkle them on top, and they look good. The bulbs, like I say, you know, it's very invasive, so if you dig the bulbs up, you can actually eat the bulb as well, in the same way, you know, you might use something with a mild garlic flavour. So yeah, I personally would recommend three-cornered leek, but other people might say otherwise. It might be too invasive for some people's tastes. And very similar is wild garlic as well. Again, it's something you'll see early spring in woodlands in the UK. You'll see carpets, basically, you know, the ground will be carpeted with wild garlic. It has, unlike the three-cornered leek, which has this quite fleshy foliage, it actually has kind of broader leaves for wild garlic. In other ways, it's very kind of similar in its growth habit. say very vigorous. So if you walk through woodlands in the early spring, you not only see it everywhere, you can smell it everywhere because the air will just smell of garlic, and very easy to introduce. You know, if you're establishing a forest garden in your own garden, it's very easy to just get some bulbs and plant them. They should establish well, and they'll just get going quite quickly, I think. Just as a reminder that even though you might see it in woodland, it's actually illegal to dig up wild plants from English woodland, and I wouldn't recommend that. I'm sure the odd little bit here and there probably wouldn't do any harm, but then if everyone started doing it, then it'd be like, you know, maybe not so good. So there are specialist nurseries that will sell wild garlic bulbs, and that's probably a more ethical way of introducing it into your own garden. Okay.
Are the flowers edible as well here, Graham?
Yes, they're edible, I think. Yep.
And make great pesto with the whole plant.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, they're very good for that. And the three-cornered leek makes a good pesto as well.
We call them rumps here.
Ramps, yes, that's another name. RAMPS, yeah, ramps, yeah.
Yes.
Or ramsons, we call them sometimes in the UK as well.
And they're protected here.
Oh, they're protected, are they? Yeah, so they're not actually protected here, but it is illegal to dig up any wild plant, I think, basically in the UK. And lovage, another favourite of mine. Again, it's kind of herbaceous, half-hardy perennial. Dies right back in the winter, but every spring it will come up. It will throw out new shoots from the roots that lay dormant under the soil. I really like the flavour. It's got a really kind of like it's like a very strong celery flavour, very kind of yeasty flavour as well. If you like Marmite and things like that, or yeast extracts, you probably like the taste of lovage. I really like it. Very strongly flavoured. So again, if you're adding it to a salad or something like that, you're probably only going to want a few leaves. Otherwise, it'll be a bit overpowering. This has never been my experience, but it can grow it can grow, I think, up to 2 or 3 meters high and have like 2 or 3 meters spread. So it can be a bit big for a small garden, but I personally have never had a problem with it in that way. It all seems to have been quite well behaved in the places I've planted it. So another recommended forest garden plant for me would be lovage for a herbaceous layer. And I was just going to maybe look at a couple of nuts and nut crops, which is thinking about those high protein crops. If we're looking for food for a future, and what we'll be kind of looking at how we're going to feed ourselves in future, I think nuts are going to play a lot larger role. So hazels and cobs. So there's lots of different varieties of hazels, selected varieties of cobs and filberts such as Butler, Ennis, Kent cob, Webb's prize cob. They can be prolific, and the nuts will store for a long time, years potentially. They will tolerate some shade, but do better in full sun. The problem is hazels are very susceptible to predation by squirrels who will strip entire trees given half a chance. So there might be questions there about how you would actually, if you're growing hazels for the nuts, how you're actually going to protect, your trees. I know that this actually could throws up some ethical conundrums for kind of, vegans, veganic growers, I think, because the only people I know of that have successfully grown hazels and cobs, actually, they trap squirrels and, to control them in that way. So it maybe throws up a bit of an ethical question about if you actually want to get crops from our hazels. And I've never really been able to come up with a satisfactory answer to that ethical conundrum myself. But I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that. I've got a couple of hazels on my forest garden allotment. I've never had a single nut from them. They grow, and once they get to about looking like this, then they're just gone the next week because the squirrels just get them when I'm not looking, and I can't read.
I'm just.
I got a few.
Oh, you've managed, yeah.
You've managed to grow them, have you, Irene, or harvest them?
They are growing naturally right beside my trailer on the island, and I managed to get some that were my height. The squirrels got the rest at the top.
Right. Yeah. It's.
I mean, I'm guessing netting will work for birds, but it's not going to work for squirrels, is it? I mean, do people grow them? If you kept them quite small, could you grow them in some sort of big fruit cage or something?
Yeah, I think that might be the possibility, but you need very big fruit cages, I think.
Yeah.
I know that. I know Martin Crawford. He actually kind of traps them and kills them, unfortunately. But I think if you're actually, I think you could probably get away with growing them as a marginal thing. But if you're doing it on a commercial scale where you're actually needing, you've got to look at your inputs that you're putting in and whether they're going to be like financially viable. And this, it does raise some questions, I think. But I'm sure there's a way. We just need to apply ourselves to think about it.
Is it just growing lots and lots?
And now I think you just lots and lots of squirrels as well. Because I think their population will grow in proportion to the availability of food source. So I think I don't know is my short answer on that one.
I was doing some reading because I live above a load of shops, so I've just got a patio, and it said you could grow them in containers like cob nuts, but I wonder, because I have never seen a squirrel up here ever, because I'm not really near any trees, but I wonder whether they'd still sniff them out or not.
I think that might be, actually growing them away from, might be a way forward.
What I did,
find out them.
Yeah.
Sorry,
what I did was I gathered them before the squirrels, and then I let them dry in the screen room, and they're perfect. Yeah,
so I think if you can catch them, I think there's got to be an optimum stage, just where they're, I think about this stage that you're seeing in the photo here, before they've kind of fully developed, and you got to get them when they're just big enough, but the squirrels are yet to take an interest in them. I guess that might be. I think it's something, if you're actually wanting to grow, I think there's lots of reasons for growing hazel, for coppice and all sorts of other reasons. But if you actually want to grow them for the nuts, it's something you'd probably have to think about quite carefully and plan quite carefully, I think. Anyway, I've got a couple more to get through and then we'll take a break. And almonds, another potential nut crop. These prefer a deep, well-drained soil, and so they're very early flowering as well, and so they can be susceptible to crop damage caused by early spring, late frosts, and can also be prone to peach leaf curl, which is a kind of disease, of peaches, and probably we can grow them in the south of England at the moment, or against the wall, a shelter spot further north, but they're a bit at the moment, with our current climatic conditions, a bit of a marginal crop. They won't do, they do require shelter and warmth. One of the care homes I used to work at, just around the corner from where I live, used to have an almond tree growing in the garden, and I used to pick a good crop of that every year. I thought it was gone now, but yeah, again, it had just been planted as an ornamental in the garden of this care home like many years earlier. And I'll just get a crop of almonds from that. So it does do well, can do well. I am in kind of south of England, basically, but my friend Ron, who I mentioned before, he's got an almond growing on his plot, which is next to mine, and that seems to do well. He seems to get a good crop most years. So that might be one to think about. Experimenting with almond grain. Oh, well, just in my notes here, it's advisable to select named varieties of sweet almonds to ensure you get a reliable crop, because many trees will yield bitter almonds which are actually poisonous to humans. So make sure you're actually planting varieties that are actually suitable for cropping. Otherwise, you might end up kind of making yourself unwell. And a monkey puzzle. So we're getting some we're getting to real kind of plants for a future stuff now, because we're talking very kind of long term. You often see monkey puzzle trees growing as ornamentals, kind of in suburban gardens, that kind of thing, very much planted, as ornamentals. I guess most of them are pretty familiar with the monkey puzzle. It has these very spiny kind of leaves. Hence, one of the few trees apparently that monkeys can't climb because they're so spiny. Hence the name monkey puzzles. But yeah, potential, according to Ken Fern, the Plants for the Future, they have a huge potential as a future food source, because the nuts, when they grow, are very nutritious. Potential as a staple food crop. But the problem is they take 30 years to actually begin cropping. So basically, even though they've got this huge potential, we're not going to start cropping them for at least another 30 years. And only the female monkey puzzles will actually produce nuts. And you have no way of telling apart the male monkey puzzle from the female monkey puzzle until they start cropping. So it's always going to be like a 50-50 gamble if you're planting a monkey puzzle, whether it's actually going to be productive. So yeah, so in Ken Fern's words here, Ken suggests, because we don't know if they're going to be productive or not, Ken suggests we start planting as many as possible as soon as possible, because they might be, in the future, they might be more of a staple crop that we can rely on if we're thinking long term. Also, for the average garden space, where a lot of it, community garden allotment, something like, they're going to be a bit big, I think, for most, most situations. They are quite large trees, but another one to maybe think about, experiment with rather. Got a couple more. Sweet chestnut, again, probably a bit too big for the average sized garden. They are a large tree. Again, a lot of the trees that are growing, that grow wild, don't really have nuts that are worth harvesting. Quite often, if you go to my local woods and you pick up the spiky kind of chestnut, what do you call it, the seed off the ground, and you open it up, you won't, the nut inside or the seed inside is often quite small and not really worth bothering with. So you wanted to grow kind of named varieties that are actually grown, have been bred for their productivity. But but say, yeah, probably not for the average small sized garden, but if you've got more space, might be worth experimenting with sweet chestnuts or growing sweet chestnuts. And walnuts, I think that's my last one. Walnuts that prefer full sun, they like a deep, well-drained soil, can be grown on higher ground in milder areas of southern England, where there's less chance of late frosts and damage to the female flowers. They can be susceptible to blight in cool, wet springs that we tend to get here in the UK, and a few other diseases they're susceptible to. Listed here, I've got varieties that are fairly resistant to these diseases: Fernet, Franquet, Mayette, and Ronde de Montagnac. So I'm guessing these are originated in France. They sound very French, these varieties. Research and selective breeding may lead to hardier cultivars that might do well in other parts of the country. But again, it tends to be very large trees, very big trees. So again, might not be suitable for the smaller garden. But again, if you've got the space, it might be worth experimenting with walnuts. Another thing to remember about walnuts is they tend to be they're allelopathic, which means that their roots give off a chemical which kind of suppresses the growth of other trees and plants growing around them. So they're not really very companionable with other trees and shrubs and things. Although that said, you know, I've seen walnuts growing and the trees and plants around them seem to be doing okay. So I think that might be, the allelopathic properties might be kind of overstated, I think, but it might be something to consider. And I think that was my last. Yeah, okay. I'll stop the slide.
Can I ask, Graham? A friend of mine has successfully grown heart nuts.
Okay.
Those they are heart shaped, and she got her first crop last year, and she was absolutely delighted.
Okay.
So
yeah. I don't know much about them. I've got Martin Crawford's book on growing nuts to hand, but it's not one I've actually tried myself. But I think, yeah, I mean, I was just trying to give like an overview of a few things there, because you can't be. There's just so many things we could be growing. It just give like a bit of an overview. But I don't know about heart nuts. They related to walnut.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
They are related.
Are
Okay.
they? And sorry, one more thing. Can I ask? Is there a reason why figs weren't included, or again was that just
didn't fit them in really? I was trying to. It was sort of ended up. I tried to do like a top 10, then it turned into like a top 50. Then I kind of pulled it back to a top 30. So, yeah, again, figs. Everywhere I think they do like a lot of sun to ripen up. I don't think they ripen that reliably in the UK. You might be lucky. We've got in the park near me. There's some figs that are growing in. Like, I've got a walled garden in part of the park. The ornamental walled garden where there's figs. And some years you do actually. They take 2 years to ripen as well, figs. So some years you do get like an edible crop, but mostly they're too kind of small and sour. They don't really get enough sunlight. But yeah, I think in a sheltered garden where you've got the space, and again, I think that they're one that like to grow in pots. They like to have their, well, I don't know if they like it, but they tend to produce more fruit if their roots are constrained and contained. So that's like they probably don't like it. It's probably their strategy for producing more fruit as a survival strategy. But yeah, I think all these things it's worth experimenting with and see what happens really. I've got Carla.
I've got one in a pot.
Oh.
But the squirrels like them as well.
Yeah, that's pretty true. Yeah. Carla, did you? I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just was going to add. I actually brought some to this garden and then found that there was already one there. Elderberry, elder trees have become quite important to me this year. Partly because they're doing all these studies about how it can fight flu and help COVID, and they grow pretty well. I mean, I've got them here, and then in the West Country, I was in an orchard of them. So they're quite easy to process into medicine that they charge a lot of money for.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that probably one would. I think one of the reasons I didn't include elderberry is because it grows so commonly in the wild. So, well, it might not be the same all around the UK, but around here, you just see elderberry growing all over the place, just wild, you know.
Yeah, it was the same in the West Country, but where I am here in Kent, and I've in Thanet definitely and around up to Canterbury, I haven't really seen them like everywhere I would expect to. And we've got loads of brambles and hawthorn and wild cherries, but no elderberries.
Really? Oh, right.
But, yeah, so I've got 3 in the garden now, and I'm going to hopefully sort of bring them back a bit more.
Yeah, I think yeah, and I think there's just so much to be said for elderberry as well. It's, like I say, it's heal, you know, it's got those medicinal properties. You can make wine, can't you, with the berries? You can make cordials with the flowers in the spring. So it's a real kind of multi-purpose plant. So yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll put that on the next time I do this. So maybe I'll put elderberry in. So again, deliberately plant it because it round here just grows everywhere. So
one thing to note with it is there's a lot of history around not using the wood for anything, and the sort of ill will that can visit you if you do that.
If you cut down an elderberry,
it
bring you kind of bad luck and stuff like that, isn't it? So yeah, it's got it's got a lot of those kind of traditions in it. Yeah. Dagmar.
So I just want to be clear on one thing with the forest garden, because you're planting trees, and then below it you're planting your shrub layer, which are plants that to ripen and produce fruit, I presume need a lot of sun. So I'm just, do you have to plant it in a sort of linear way, where almost like a forest ride, where you've got the tall trees on one side and then the shrubs and then the cover? Or can you plant it in a circular way? Does that make sense?
Well, I think there's all sorts of variations, and you know, there's only one way to plant a forest garden, and that's your own. But I think, I mean,
it just seems to go against everything that.
Well, I think that's
horticulture, where you would plant things under a tree where they're needed.
Well, I think that's why I was emphasizing when we talked about the forest garden design is like the spacing, that you do need to space the trees quite far apart so the sun. Other parts of the world, you know, particularly with forest gardening originated, you know, places like Kerala and stuff like that, where they have a lot more sunlight, you know, because of the latitude. And I think the thing is, Robert Hart, he kind of tried to directly, what he'd seen working in Kerala and places like that, directly try to transfer it to the UK. And did find, you know, precisely those problems, you know, not enough sun was able to get to the ground cover and the shrub layers and stuff like that, which is why Martin Crawford would suggest much more spaced out plantings. There's a lot more space between the trees. So for that very reason, so the sun can get in.
His forest garden feels quite dense.
Yeah, Robert Hart.
Martin Crawford's, I think, which is the one that we watched on the video. Martin
Crawford
it was.
I can't remember now. But
walking through it, it felt sort of quite dense.
Yeah, I think
like there was mass. You know, it's not like you could walk between the trees, or.
I think that was probably Robert Hart. Robert Hart planted a lot more dense. If you actually go to Martin Crawford's, it is actually kind of quite open, and there's quite a lot of space, and there's wide paths and rides, as you say, you know, like areas where, you know, the open areas where there'll be things growing. So
And you wouldn't have to plant, say, the shrubs on the south side of the tree.
Again, it's that answer. It depends. I think you'd have to look at the requirements of those. But some things don't mind a bit of shade, and some things like it really, really sunny. And I think by and large, the things that like the sun would be on the south side, and you tend to put the larger trees to the north of the plot. I think. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'll leave that there if that's okay. Because what is it now? It's nearly 2:00. So if we come back at 2:30, is that okay? And then we'll think about permaculture and futures. So, and yeah, just to say that kind of little overview was by no means exhaustive or extensive. It was just like trying to maybe a few personal suggestions of crops or things to grow and things that might be worth, things that are a bit more marginal and experimental. And of course, there could be a lot more. I've got a book to hand here, Plants for Your Food Forest, that's just been published by Plants for a Future. So if you go to the Plants for a Future website, you can find it there. And they've done a few of these now. So it's like a lot of it, in a way, is recycling the information that's in the Plants for a Future book that's been talked about a couple of times. And most of the information in here is actually, I don't know if you can see the pages, but you've got these kind of plant profiles that's probably a lot more. In here, there's 500 plants for your forest garden, and I think I talked about 30 there. So it's a lot more kind of extensive, and it's got a lot of these kind of tables of plants and things like that. So if you want a bit more depth, probably that's one I'd kind of recommend probably. And Plants for Future have done a few of these now. There's one on edible trees, got another one on edible shrubs, and this, that, and the other. So they're kind of quite nice, but quite inexpensive, quite accessible. You're not going to get loads and loads of sort of scientific data that's difficult to wade through. And the books by who we've already mentioned, Martin Crawford, who's done some books on growing nuts and growing trees. Unfortunately, not quite in reach at the moment, but when we're having a break, I'll grab them and kind of maybe show a couple of those. But anyway, hopefully it was an introduction and some of the useful plants and trees. Anyway, we'll have a break. So see you at 2:30.
Right.
Okay, welcome back. Hopefully everybody is refreshed after a break. Before I move on to the Carla's dog. No, Carla's dog. Before I move on, I'll have to grab a couple of books off the shelf that refer to the stuff we were talking about this morning, or not earlier. So there's a couple of Martin Crawford books, Trees for Gardens, Orchards and Permaculture, which pretty kind of, can't really hold it up properly, but it's pretty comprehensive in terms of some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, in terms of choices of trees for the forest garden. And
is that a picture of a heart nut on the front?
I think it is, yes, in the top corner. I believe it is, yes.
Ah.
So, and another of his How to Grow Your Own Nuts, another Martin Crawford recommended title. Again, very, very comprehensive if you want to kind of find out more about some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Sorry, I can't really hold it up and show you the pages at the same time, but I hope you get the gist. And there's another one here, Perennial Vegetables, which is more thinking about well, perennial vegetables, obviously, and yeah, and there's kind of lots more titles as well, but they're probably, you know, I think the Marcy Crawford ones, and along with the Plants for Future books, they're pretty. I'd recommend them. Obviously, you get a lot of kind of repetition. They can only, you know, there's only so many trees and plants you can kind of grow, but all these books seem to kind of cover them, but often cover quite different aspects of them, I guess.
Sorry, was that perennial vegetables Martin Crawford as well?
It was, but there's some other. There you go. Martin Crawford there. I don't know if you can see that or not, but yeah, so check out some of his books as well as the Plants for a Future titles. Anyway, I'm going to move on and maybe think about permaculture. We've thought about permaculture and permaculture design and ethics and principles in lots and lots of different contexts, ranging from maybe, you know, the garden or community or the personal, thinking about how we can apply permaculture to our own kind of lives and thinking and personal lives, things like that. I'm going to maybe look at different aspects of permaculture in terms of the future and or futures, plural. So I'm going to screen share. And slideshow. And hopefully folks can see the screen there, future scenarios. So we talked a bit about David Holmgren and
sorry, Graham, I don't know if it's showing correctly. We're getting like, it looks like we've got your whole screen with all the toolbar and everything.
Oh, have you? Let's just maybe stop share and try again. Is that?
That's better.
Oh, cool. That's good. Right. Okay. I don't know what happened there. So yeah, thinking about future scenarios, and I don't know if people recognise this image what I've put on the title page there. Does anyone recognise what that might be? That blue line.
Is it a bell-shaped curve?
It is. It's a bell-shaped curve, and why do you think I'm using that image of the bell curve?
Makes me think of peak oil and all things like that are going on at the moment.
Yeah, so we'll be like maybe talking a little bit about those sort of issues a bit. So yeah, I'm going to reference this book here that was published by David Holmgren around about, again, must be 10, 15 years ago now. Future Scenarios, How Communities Can Adapt to Peak Oil and Climate Change. So I guess, yeah, sort of thinking about how things might pan out in the future according to how certain scenarios might play out. And so this is a book that David Holmgren, I've say, published a few years ago, but a few other people have been thinking, you know, and this futurologists are thinking along these same lines, and broadly looking at 4 broad scenarios of how things might play out according to different certain scenario, you know, how certain factors might affect the future. So to kind of summarize, I guess the main factors would be around climate change. So we've been thinking about climate change quite a lot. It's been quite a lot in the media around, and I guess we're all seeing, I don't need to talk too much about climate change. I guess people are quite familiar with the arguments that climate change is a thing, that it's happening. I think it was kind of, you know, there was consensus around, I think, 97% of the scientific community that climate change, man-made and anthropogenic climate change is a thing, and it's going, it's manifesting. We're seeing, and it's becoming less and less of a kind of abstract concept as we're seeing extreme weather events and flooding and wildfires and all these things that we're probably all quite familiar with. So climate change is a possible driver for what a possible future might look like. And one of the other potential drivers is, as said there, this idea of peak oil. So this little diagram here is an illustration of the idea of peak oil and shows that kind of bell curve here that we just mentioned. And the idea behind the thinking about peak oil is basically not so much that all the oil is going to run out and that, one day someone will pull up a filling station somewhere and they'll put the nozzle in their car and the very last drop of petrol will come and all the petrol is gone after that, all the oil is gone. It's more about the availability of oil that it's easier to kind of obtain. And of course, our society, our culture has been run on oil. It's the preserved energy that was captured from the sunlight millions and millions of years ago by trees, and then those trees were fossilized and became carbon, and so we're digging up and we're running our society and our culture. Our world is basically being run on the fossilized sunlight of millions of years ago, like those trees that were buried in what we might call deep time. So if we think in terms of deep time and the time that we've been around and time of our history and how that stacks up in terms of kind of maybe geological time. The age of oil has been a very, very short period of time, really, even in terms of humans being around on the planet. If you think that we have been around, arguably, depending on your definition of human beings, Homo sapiens, how long we've actually been around, so depending on that definition, probably at most kind of about 4 million years, something like that, which is actually quite a long period of time when we look in terms of, history. So for millions and millions of years, we basically lived as kind of hunter-gatherers, scavengers, basically lived on the land, close to nature, obtaining our food and shelter with what was directly around us, as do the majority of animal species. And so I guess we think, the age of agriculture, we could trace that back maybe 4,000 or 5,000, at most 10,000 years. Again, stacked up against those millions of years, it's a fairly short period of history, really. But I guess it was around 200 years or so ago that we could sort of talk about, the dawn of the age of oil, really, the dawn of the industrial age, when we started to be able to dig coal and oil out of the ground and make use of that. And so our little diagram here starts around about the year 1850, which probably, give or take a few years. And so the nature of that oil, fairly easy to get out of the ground, fairly easy to excavate from our mines. So that oil and coal, it was cheap, it was of high quality, easy to find and produce, and high energy returns. And that's kind of how we went on for a couple of 100 years. And then coming up to like maybe the present day, sort of the late or the early 20th century. And so it's almost like we're getting to the age, or the end of that age, where that easily accessible, high return, easy to find and produce, high quality oil, we're coming to the end of that age. So what's going to be increasingly happening over the next few, as oil becomes increasingly difficult to find, we're seeing falling or decreasing energy returns. In other words, we're putting more energy into extracting that oil than we are actually getting in terms of the energy that oil is producing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we're seeing kind of volatile high prices for that oil, very much fluctuating. That's very much a thing we're seeing at the moment. We're fluctuating quite high at the moment, and we're going to be seeing the consequences of that over the next few months directly. Gets more expensive and more difficult to extract that oil or coal. More pollution, higher carbon outputs. We're having to look for that oil or fuel in less accessible places, and it's tending to be of low quality oil. So the idea being, that we've kind of peaked in terms of we either have reached the peak, or we're going to reach the peak, or we passed the peak some time ago. Different scientists have different ideas about that, but there is sort of a broad consensus of peak oil being round about kind of now, this period we're in currently in history. And from here on in, we're going to be on this kind of decline in terms of the availability and quality of our oil. An analogy that I kind of like, this kind of shows how my mind works. This is an analogy that really stuck in my head. I went to a talk by Rob Hopkins, who is one of the co-founders. He came up with the idea of transition towns, and we may talk about transition towns a little bit more in a moment. But I went to this talk that he did about transition towns, and he was talking about this concept of peak oil, and he put it in a way that really stuck with me. So I was saying maybe it shows how my mind works, in that he talks about this idea of, imagine that you and your friends, every night you go to the local pub, and you've done this for years. You've always gone to the pub at the end of the road. You and your mates, you always meet there most evenings, or maybe once or twice a week in the local pub. And every week you go to the pub, and every week you order a pint of beer, and the barman will pour you a pint of beer, and it's just there. It's always available. There's always beer on the taps, and you're drinking, and you're enjoying that. And then one day, you and your friends, you go down to the pub on Friday evening, and you order a pint of beer, and the barman says, "Sorry, mate, there's no beer left. It's all gone now. We won't be getting any more beer." So you kind of look at your friend and you kind of scratch your heads for a minute, think, what are we going to do? We must better do something about this. And you think, well, imagine all the years we've been coming in here, and all the years that we've been drinking. Think how much beer we must have spilt on the carpet over all these years. All those times someone knocked a drink over and it got spilt on the carpet. So there must be loads of beer in that carpet. If we could find a way of extracting that beer from the carpet, we could carry on drinking for a bit longer. And that really struck me. That kind of felt like, he was using an analogy of like, the easily available oil is kind of no longer there, or it's running out. But, his analogy, extracting it from the carpet, is around, kind of things like our kind of fracking and unconventional oils, and these ways we can keep extracting oils from these very difficult, inaccessible places. But we can keep going. We can keep the party going a little bit longer. But sooner or later, there's going to be consequences to that. It's not going to be very good quality beer. It's not going to be very good quality oil. But we can keep it, keep going a bit longer. And I thought that was a nice, it shows how my mind works. It was an analogy that really stuck in my mind. So this idea of peak oil, that not so much the oil is going to suddenly run out, but over time it's going to become of less high quality. We're having to extract it from more and more difficult places. And most importantly, this falling, decreasing energy return. In fact, I've heard it argued we actually use more energy to extract these oils than we actually get from the oil itself, if that makes sense. And how long is that actually not even sustainable for? How long is that actually, is it possible to continue with that? So David Holmgren argues for these twin drivers that are kind of going to affect our future scenarios. So rising or increasing climate change, kind of crossing over with peak oil. And these are going to be two of our, peak oil kind of says that it's becoming more and more difficult to find that oil and extract that oil. Climate change is saying, well, we should be leaving that oil in the ground anyway, because the more of it we're burning, the more kind of carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere, and the more we're going to accelerate kind of climate change and global warming and all that. Also, global warming is probably not always the best, because that just implies it's going to get warmer, but actually it's all about climate instability. I think, more and more unpredictable events and more kind of extreme weather events. Anyway, so I say this book was actually Holmgren's Future Scenarios was probably published about 10, maybe 15 years ago now. And these are his two main drivers. Well, I think there's a couple of other drivers we could probably add to this. I think we have financial instability, I think, and the volatility of financial markets that, and those the unpredictability of those things like, the 2008 financial crash and all that kind of thing, those financial things. And of course, the one that's emerged over the last couple of years is the potential of pandemics and things like that. They're going to kind of maybe be drivers in what our future scenarios are going to look like. Whether we're coming up to the end of this pandemic or not, but there may be other variants that might emerge. There might be new pandemics that might kind of emerge. So pandemics certainly something that a lot of people are arguing that, we're just at the beginning of this in terms of, the holistic picture of future health. So there are a number of, as well as climate change and peak oil, I think there are a number of drivers for our future scenarios. And I was going to look at maybe 4 of these scenarios, but let's give a little bit more context. So thinking in terms of, again, this kind of longer view of history and our trajectory as a species through history. So this diagram is going back, say, about 10,000-12,000 years ago, the dawn of the age of agriculture, when we started cultivating crops, when we tended to start living in settlements like cities and things like that, as opposed to living directly on the land. So pre-industrial, broadly sustainable culture was our kind of default for several thousand years, really. So we've kind of compressed that into a short period, in terms of this graph. And then with our vertical axis, looking at energy and resource use, population and pollution outputs against the horizontal axis of historical time, we can see it's fairly stable for several thousand years. And then the industrial revolution occurs when fossil fuels start becoming, a bigger factor in our trajectory. So we can see this energy and resource use, population and pollution rapidly in the industrial ascent, the modern age, with kind of this rapid climb here. And this kind of like where the little green spot is there representing present day, basically, and, the baby boom. And so thinking about where things might go on this graph in terms of futures. So future time going off here, and at the moment, we're calling this diagram, it's still an unknown where we're going to go. So Holmgren basically outlines four scenarios, and first is what's sometimes broadly characterized as brown technology. or sometimes called the business as usual scenario, that we basically carry on as we are, really. Some might say all this stuff about, climate change, a load of rubbish. It's just a conspiracy theory. It's just like, it's all a con, it's all a hoax. There is no climate change. We just carry on burning fossil fuels. That's how we're always powered. Capitalism, that's how we'll continue to power capitalism into the future. And we'll always find new sources of oil. We'll find new reserves under the ground, or we'll carry on doing fracking, stuff like that. Basically, carrying on as we are. And so, in terms of our graph, there's our climb over historical time, present day. Maybe we slow the curve slightly. We might rein it in a little bit with our fossil fuel usage, but by and large, we just carry on into the future. The whole, the growth, the whole myth of growth, that we just carry on this trajectory into the unknown future. Then our second scenario, green tech, maybe sometimes called the kind of eco-consumerist scenario. So around slower energy decline and relatively mild climate change as factors, but basically characterized as we kind of recognize that fossil fuel usage is unsustainable, but we're able to kind of replace most of the things that are driven by fossil fuels. We find, sustainable or renewable energies, solar technologies, for example, a lot more kind of solar-driven technologies. Sometimes nuclear power would be considered, as green. Some would consider nuclear power to be a green tech, in that the burning, doesn't produce high carbon outputs like burning fossil fuels, and theoretically, they're inexhaustible supplies. So nuclear may, controversially or questionably, may be part of a green tech future. But basically, the thinking here is that we can carry on basically living our same lifestyles, the lifestyles we've become accustomed to, thanks to the availability of fossil fuels. But all those, this is all met by kind of sustainable technologies in the future. So this kind of consumerist, this eco-consumerist scenario. A couple of things around the characterization of that would be a lot incentives versus sanctions. That there'd be a lot of incentives to adopt kind of green technologies. There'd be kind of grants, there'd be tax breaks, things like that, to encourage people to adopt, solar technologies, things like that. And sanctions, there'll be kind of fines, or there'll be kind of financial penalties for those that are still, polluting and using a lot of fossil fuels. And so this kind of like balance of incentives versus sanctions. I think my friend James, who did the bioregional session a few weeks back, he talks about the green police scenario, that there'll be the green police will be coming knocking on your door if you've got too many lights on, or you're using too much energy. So anyway, green tech, eco-consumerist. And then our next scenario is about rapid climate change and rapid fossil fuel depletion. And, I jumped ahead there. So in terms of our little diagram into the future, we've got our green tech. We've got a drop in energy and resource usage to some degree, but basically we're then on this kind of stable kind of line into the future, stable. So this is our kind of trajectory into the future. We've kind of plateaued in terms of energy use, population, pollution, and so forth. And then, yeah, our third scenario, which is around rapid climate change and rapid fossil fuel depletion, is rapid crash, catastrophic collapse scenario, where it all goes pear-shaped very, very quickly. Sometimes called the Mad Max scenario. And people seen, people are probably familiar with the film Mad Max, where there's been some kind of apocalyptic event and large swathes of humanity have kind of been wiped out, and human society is kind of characterized by marauding, almost tribal bands of survival competing for the last bits of oil and things like that. So, everything's gone bad very rapidly. So I guess everybody's kind of familiar with, and I think this is the one, a lot of science fiction literature or speculative literature about the futures, there is that certain appeal around kind of the rapid crash scenario. There's books like The Road. I've never actually read The Road by, I can't remember, Cormac McCarthy, I think, wrote it. There's the whole kind of, the whole Walking Dead kind of series on TV that's sort of around this, society has collapsed and it's the survivors that are all kind of competing with each other. The Mad Max films are talked about. So there is a kind of, does seem to have a bit of a romance to it, this kind of rapid crash scenario in a lot of our speculative literature and fiction. And so in terms of our journey, our trajectory here, we've kind of come through history. We've had this rapid ascent over a couple of 100 years. And at present day, maybe the brown, I see that it kind of comes out the brown tech a little bit. It actually follows that, but then suddenly everything drops rapidly in terms of energy and resource use, population. It'll just a complete drop there and crashes out. And the final scenario I was going to look at in here is called the Earth Steward or the Managed Transition scenario. And the thinking here being that we actually see that, we can recognize the way things are going in terms of resource usage, climate change. So we actually kind of, rather than have this rapid crash, we can actually kind of do this, we can actually adapt to this future and we can reduce our energy usage and our fossil fuel usage in a far more kind of planned and managed way. So I guess this would be things like relocalizing, relocalizing our food growing, relocalizing a lot of production, a lot of the resources that we use. Instead of things being very global, things are kind of much more moved to a relocalized level. Reskilling, I think, maybe a lot of, we've talked on the course, about a lot of these skills that have tended to be lost, particularly over the last 50 to 100 years. And we're talking about coppicing and charcoal making and a lot of skills around food growing, even with things like thatching, making, thatch roofs and that, all these skills that have been kind of lost, maybe reconnecting with a lot of those. And so it's actually kind of this managed way of moving in, managed adaptation to a low energy future, which is a lot of what the transition towns were talking or are talking about. Let's move on to the thing there. So in terms of our trajectory, we've kind of had this the modern rapid ascent, and we come to like the present day, but we're, rather than just dropping down, plummeting down, we're actually designing and actually planning for this energy descent in a way that is actually, we can almost see it as an opportunity. I think, it's if it's coming down the line, we have the choice there. Do we see it as a threat or an opportunity? And there are some framing you could think, well, actually, this could be actually a real opportunity for the human race and for us to live more kind of, all the things we're talking about, regenerative living, regenerating biodiversity, regenerating communities, kind of small scale economics, all those things we've been talking about. And obviously, Rob Hopkins, he was a student at, no, he wasn't a student, he was a lecturer at the University of Kinsale in Ireland. And as part of a permaculture design course that he was running with the University of Kinsale, he got his students to kind of think and visualize what might a low energy Kinsale look like, how could, post carbon Kinsale. And so they produced this document on kind of low energy Kinsale. And he kind of took that model and adapted that model when he moved to Totnes in south of England. And that was what led to indirectly of setting up a transition Totnes, which is the first transition town. And that kind of spun up as a bit of around 10, 15 years ago, there was kind of quite a lot of proliferation of this idea of transition towns, where it'd just be people thinking about ways their communities and their localities and the places where they lived and worked and had families could actually adapt to this low energy future. So, and I think transition towns is another thing that, like biomimicry, it's not quite the same as permaculture, but it's almost like a complementary sort of movement, I think. Have we actually got anyone that's involved with transition towns at all on the course?
I go to like lots of events that's put on by Ealing Transition.
Ealing Transition?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And a few years ago, there's a really nice talk by Maddie Harland.
Oh, yeah.
So they do some really nice things. Yeah, I've learned a lot. They put films on, they have events, etc.
Yeah, so traditionally that's sort of what's happened, they'll put on films. There's some films about sort of peak oil and stuff like that, the things we've been talking about, and just generally getting people to kind of, I think they use a lot of things that we were talking about yesterday, things like the open space, they have open space meetings, but just bringing people together to think about how can we as a community adapt to, a low energy future. I think actually I did a talk for Ealing, Transition Town Ealing myself a few years ago, but it was quite a while ago now. But yeah, and I think it manifests in a lot of different ways. Things like local currencies have come from, like the Totnes pound and the Brixton pound and Lewis pound were kind of like initiated by transition groups. There's been transition groups that have set up kind of local breweries and things like that, where they're making beers with local, hops and barley that's grown locally, local shop, all sorts of things, all sorts of ways of thinking about what a low energy or low carbon future might think about, and seeing it very much as kind of the positive sides of that, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, we're all doomed, that actually this could be, really a good thing. Anyway, so they're kind of the four scenarios as kind of laid out by Holmgren in his Future Scenarios book, and others. There are other people who've come up with similar sort of ways that the future might play out. And so, yeah, what I'm going to do is put everybody into, everybody's happy with this, going to put everybody into small groups, and in your small group, I'm going to give each group one of those scenarios to focus on. So some of you have been in pairs, some of you are in threes. I hope that's okay. But each group will have a scenario to focus on, and got 3 questions here. So what would the infrastructure look like in your future scenario in terms of maybe food production and distribution, energy production, shelter and the built environment, transportation, dealing with waste. So all that stuff around infrastructure or things, if that makes sense. And then the second question may be more about the not so tangible objects in the world, but what would the culture look like in your future scenario? For example, what kind of systems of governments might there be? And what might education look like? What kind of shared values might that culture have? Or even thinking about, what might be some of the kind of spiritual aspects around that? What kind of might the arts look like? So if the first one is about things and stuff, infrastructure, tangible stuff in the world, this is more about the kind of the invisible stuff, I guess. And then the third question there, what might be the role of permaculture or vegan permaculture even in your future scenario? So is that okay then if I send you to breakout rooms to think about and have a chat about these questions? And each group, as I say, group 1 is the kind of brown tech business as usual. Group 2, the green eco-consumerist vision. Group 3, the rapid collapse. And group 4, managed transition. So any questions before I send you all off?
So we're going through each of the 4 scenarios and applying one question. Is that right?
No, it's each group has got a scenario, which you've got is the name of your group. I think you can see that, can't you, when you go in the group? I'm not sure.
Oh, a scenario, and then we've got to talk through these things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So I invite you to do that. And any questions for us? About 10 minutes. I don't know what the time is now. I've got my clock to hand. Bear with me. Yeah, so about 10 minutes. Okay, so have a chat and then we'll do a bit of feedback. Here. Right, hang on. So I set the breakout rooms up and they're not assigned. Bear with me a second. I've got to do that again. I don't know why that's happening. So bear with me a second.
You still sharing screen with us?
Yeah, I'm sharing. Yeah, I'll leave the screen up. Sorry, I actually set up the breakout rooms and they got deleted, so I'm just recreating them. Right, so that should work now. Sorry about that.
but did not feel a bit claustrophobic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you go in. Like we went in a lot and we purposefully got one that had like a dinette, a sofa, a back kitchen, and it was okay. Like it was 2 of us and 2 animals. And we hosted more people than that in it sometimes.
Oh, wow.
And it really was okay. But you know, other people we met had converted huge structures and they were like quite overwhelming. But I think it's really personal. Like I loved one door to nature and that was sort of all I needed.
Yeah.
And now walls freak me out a bit.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, everybody had some interesting conversations. I hope nobody found it too traumatizing to talk about some of this stuff. But yeah, perhaps each group could give a little bit of feedback, and then we can have maybe a wider discussion. So, group 1. Round tech business as usual. Perhaps you could summarize some of the things that came out of your conversation.
That was us, wasn't it? We kind of, when we first started doing it, we were thinking, oh, it's just going to be exactly the same and nothing will really change. But then once we started thinking about it, we were like, well, actually, maybe it will, because things will, like you were saying, as the energy gets less quality and that kind of thing, maybe it'll be that only people with more money can afford it and people with less money can't afford it. And we were saying maybe that will then make society have a bigger gap because, yeah, there'll be more disparity between the two. And we were also saying you might have to choose, like you wouldn't have all the technologies and everything to hand because obviously they use energy, and you might have to choose whether you have a TV or a fridge or whether you use your washing machine once a week or something like that. And we were saying maybe with the permaculture, it might be that everyone had to start growing their own food, because if everything continued and the weather changes did get more extreme, it might be that it's less imported and more growing your own food.
Could be, yeah. Okay. Anything else do you want to add?
What else did we say, Carla?
I think we talked about it being sort of like, yeah, a lot more splits. I think being similar to how they are now, but getting far more intense, you know, because we're already seeing a lot of protesting and riot and trying to change. But then if, you know, there's only so many times you can see that really not changing, when you might get some serious responses and like real unrest within that, sort of politically and societally. We sort of mostly focused on England because obviously there's going to be mass migration and things, but it's really hard for us to sort of think how much that might impact other places. But the other thing we talked about a bit was if there is this sudden divide where suddenly these fuels become a really inaccessible source for everybody, if you haven't got money and you can't afford this precious thing that's going to disappear eventually or become less and less easy to get hold of, like you might need to learn permaculture, for example, or your own survival. But if you haven't got the energy, the electric, the fuels to have your phone and your computer, are you going to have to go back to storytelling and verbal means of making sure everybody can access these things? Like it's like a forced complete change of culture, almost like a slowed down version of the Mad Max thing, I guess. But yeah, I think that was most of it.
Great, thank you. And group 2, our green tech, kind of the eco consumerist future.
Yeah, hi, that was Irene and I. Do you want to talk, Irene, or shall I start? Or is she gone? Irene, are you there?
Go ahead.
Hi.
You can go ahead.
This is a really tricky one, actually, because it's kind of what we want to be doing, and half the world is kind of doing it, but then the other half isn't. And it's a real fine line between sort of people pretending that they're doing the right thing and all the greenwashing that's going on, and actually doing the right thing. So it's certainly a good thing. And I think, we felt and hoped that there would be, things like infrastructure and housing, there'd be more pressure on developers to use more eco materials, recycled materials, buildings to have a greener edge, to use more solar power, wind power and all that, grey water recycling, and for new, any new buildings to have to comply with those kind of regulations. There doesn't seem to be anything in place at the moment. Food production would be more localized with less packaging, more organic fruit and veg, less waste or no waste, more reuse. More people growing their own food, probably not able to completely feed themselves, but certainly making an effort to grow as much as they could and what they had. We talked about transport. So again, there would be more focus on electric, hydrogen vehicles, more cycling and walking, improvements in public transport, sharing transport is something that could be improved a lot more, not having people sitting in cars. Education, I think we both agreed that in both our countries, education was pretty terrible. And we felt it should be more holistic. Let's focus on sort of politics and wars and more, actually just teach kids some life skills. They're really not being taught any life skills, and they're really important things to have. Maybe the kids could spend more time with their parents and get their parents to teach them things that they don't know. More nurturing. Arts. With arts, we felt that maybe more recycled materials could be used rather than buying new stuff. Back to all the forgotten skills, reviving all those. Spiritually, I think, things like churches and things are great. People need to have some kind of faith, but it shouldn't be, it doesn't have to be a god. It could be sort of more of a Gaian or Edonist beliefs. I think that was it, really. A vegan permaculture. Do you want to do that bit, Irene, and add to what I've been saying?
I didn't write anything down, but I think that's the basis of life, is to live sustainably and to live as much as we can off our land and soil, and respect it at the same time. We were talking about herb kitchen gardens and patio gardens, and as much as possible, if people don't have land, to try to grow their own things, grow sprouts, grow herbs, things they can do in their kitchens if they don't have land. And and living that lifestyle of respecting nature and just planning ahead. And I think also a lot of that is the forgotten things, things that I'm learning again, things my mom did, canning, salting, fermentation, and all of these forgotten skills of sewing and just living with what we have. And recently I began making junk journals out of my garbage and things like that, just getting back to living our lives deliberately.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And how about rapid collapse? I think that was like Marcia and Laura had rapid collapse.
Yeah, so we had an interesting discussion. Laura, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, in terms of infrastructure, there will probably no more centralized organizations or governments running things. There might be small sheltered communities, some local authorities, which could be violent or non-violent. One thing that we did get in the end, I think we started a bit like with the idea of Mad Max and being very violent, but actually like nature thrives when we cooperate and not when we compete all the time. So the ones that would survive in the end would be the good-willed people, which was a positive end note, I think, of this. People would get very creative, having to find solutions for their resources, but also in a way to, like also in the arts, to have a ventilation of all that misery that just passed. So there might be a lot of pop-up arts everywhere around the world, spontaneously done by people. Might be more use of horses and camels and other types of animals for transport. You wanna add on to that, Marcia?
Oh, sure, yeah. So yeah, we thought art would have a really big role culturally, pop-up art, and it's going to be an outlet as well. And then in terms of vegan permaculture, we thought that it would become more popular, but also because of necessity, because it will be really one of very few options, and small communities. And also we talked about nomadic communities who could be kind of semi-nomadic, maybe like you migrate to the north and you plant something there at one type of the year, and then you move, and it's time of the year, and then you move, and then you get south, and then you kind of reap the harvest of something you planted there at another time of the year. So we were definitely, I think, switching from the kind of post-apocalyptic to the kind of more positive outcomes. And we thought there could be some culturally positive things, and some quite spiritual focused groups, a diversity of types of groups that you could align yourself to. So some might be quite spiritual, some might be like a little local mafia. It's kind of like all these different, because of no centralized government. But we left it on the positive, I think.
That's good to hear. Okay, and the last group, the last but not least, was our managed transition. group.
Want to go, Rachel or Natalia?
You look like you were writing notes there, Nikki.
I've written notes. Okay, I'll and then I'll pass over to you if I've missed anything. So, well, this is I think we got the easy one really. So yeah, localized food production and energy production. Yes, cooperative networks within communities, decentralized. So most needs met locally. So there wouldn't be much need for cars. But if there was, electric cars have an excellent public transport system. But again, that wouldn't even be needed very much because most things would happen locally. Yeah, we talked about for governance citizens' assemblies, which is something that's been, that actually is in place. I'm not sure where, but it's very much what Extinction Rebellion are demanding. And it makes a lot of sense. It's very practical, rather similar to a jury system, which makes decisions in law. So citizens' assemblies, and we thought educationally, similar to what group said, sort of more Steiner school type education, much more individual, where individualism is celebrated. So each person is sort of respected for their own qualities, rather than the current system, which is just awful. If you don't fit in, you can have your life almost destroyed by it. Yeah, which would be much more just sort of joyful and soulful, and technology actually could really help with that, with bits that can't be taught locally. Tech would really help, as we've seen recently. Yes, art, much more natural materials would be used. Creativity, when everything's, when we're dependent, then we become very creative. So there would be art everywhere, really. And so for the last one, we didn't have much time to talk about this, but it really, vegan permaculture is just core to everything, really. And as well as animals not being killed for food, it's also we need to really embrace animal rights as well. So what have I missed? You said, Rachel, I didn't write it down, but you mentioned something about tech solutions that I...
Yes, I just mentioned I went to a talk on non-fungible tokens recently, of which I didn't grasp a huge amount, but it seemed to be a good example of new techie things out there that really could actually provide, for when we were talking about the citizens' assemblies and that sort of thing, transparent ways of recording information. And that we shouldn't shy away from tech if we were going local. There could be bits of tech that were coming up that could be really useful in that sort of setup as well.
How about you, Natalia? Was there anything I missed?
I remember about shifting, like system change. So the most behaviors something behavior and put on opposite scale to change the system is paradigm shift. So I was talking about exactly this, paradigm shift. I don't see this happening without moving away from anthropocentric worldview, without changing from philosophy of welfareism to animal rights to respecting nature. And another just little comment, this society was described by Wilbon Saul in his book Through the Eyes of a Stranger. I put it in chat, the book.
Great, thank you. So so we've heard from each group, and I'm just time checking again. So maybe we could have a few, has anyone got any kind of feedback to any other group? Anything that you heard that you kind of agreed with, or you got like to comment on, or just opening up for a few minutes conversation?
I can't believe nobody mentioned Don't Look Up movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of all the scenarios in one film. They use this different problem, but it's about climate change.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said there, Natalia.
The movie called Don't Look Up.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like green future, it's what like millionaires were trying to do, building stuff and sending it to space.
Yeah, we watched that a few days ago. So yeah. Dagmar, you have your hand up.
So something that Marsha said that was really interesting was that I almost see this as a kind of cyclical thing where you've got where we are now, and we could either go up where things get worse, or we could go down to the green tech where things are sort of slowly getting better, and from there you go on to the what do we call it, the Earth Steward. And then the other way, if things get really bad and they get worse, you've got the complete apocalyptic collapse. But from there, you know, Marsha was saying that, you know, they ended on a positive note. From when you've sort of got nothing, you have to start again, and then you know, if there's no people, suddenly the plants start growing, and you have to grow your own food, and you have to do that. So it's not it sort of all seems to be kind of connected. Anyway, that was my thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I was amazed Marsha and Laura actually made so many positives out of it. If I'd had that group, it would have been all doom and gloom, but maybe that says a lot about me, I think.
It was doom and gloom. It was, but Laura was talking about collaboration, cooperation, and it started to become more positive, which was good for me, because I found it a little bit traumatic thinking about it, actually. It wasn't very nice to think about it. But the other thing I was going to say is that it was interesting that a few groups mentioned art as having a role in some of these scenarios, which I found really interesting.
It made me think, I got a quote drop into my email box last week about green businesses, and it was from the guy who runs BlackRock, which is apparently the largest asset management company in the world. So they do all equity funds. And he was predicting that the next 1,000 companies that have a valuation over $1 billion will be developing green hydrogen, green agriculture, and everything like that. And when I saw it, I found it a bit, I couldn't make sense of it, but this whole conversation has helped me playing it that he's hedging his bets on the whole green consumerism thing. And part of me feels quite hopeful that if people like him are thinking, actually, the fossil fuel thing has no future, they're going to be investing in that. I suppose that's quite positive, because, you know, they could still be sticking their head in the sand. But at the same time, it makes me want to push on and say, no, maybe we should be thinking about our managed transition as well. But I don't want to be with him, to be somewhere else. So yes. It's also, I also wonder whether we'll end up with pockets of everything rather than the whole world going one way or t'other, that you could end up with perhaps places that do go through more of a managed transition, or they try to, and other places that just collapse into dire situations.
I think that is happening a bit now, isn't it? With, you know, in order to get what we want, we're exploiting the global south and creating pretty horrific things.
Okay, I think, yeah, we could probably continue this, but need to kind of wrap up a little bit. I've got a couple of little bits to add on to this session. So I'll go back to the screen share. And so hopefully people can see that, okay? And okay, so this was actually, I went for a walk during lockdown, and this just appeared, this graffiti just appeared on a wall in the street quite near me. And it's a diagram. I mean, it wasn't me that did it, and it wasn't James either that also talks about this stuff. This is just someone random and just sprayed this on the wall. But it's this kind of, which I thought was a nice graphic, where it's looking at, you know, this is now, this is where we're at now, and this is like the funnel of time, and this idea of possible futures, how things might play out. That we've got like probable and preferable. So this way things might, you know, the way things will probably, you know, are likely to work out, or the probable futures. And do we just kind of let those roll and they take their place? Or do we kind of actively think, how can we kind of bring maybe the more preferable futures into being? And a couple of little bits of commentary on what David, and bearing in mind David Holmgren's book's actually kind of quite old now. It's actually about 15 years ago. And as somebody's thinking, you know, I think he's kind of, one of the things he's been arguing for in recent years is actually this idea of crash on demand, that we actually work to bring about like a crash, because it's actually, well, he actually kind of characterizes green tech and brown tech as being some degree like fantasy futures. This idea that, you know, that we can just carry on as we are, that there's limitless fossil fuels, and that climate change isn't a thing, and, you know, the idea that we can just go on into the future as we are now, capitalism, oil-powered capitalism, of just going into the future is to some degree a fantasy scenario. And as is this idea that we can just have like kind of green capitalism, you know, that we can have exactly the same economic systems, exactly the same governance systems, exactly the same social values in place as what we have now, but just substituting kind of sustainable energy, or kind of, you know, solar power and hydrogen cars and lab grown meat or whatever it is, you know, sort of. And that to some degree that is a kind of a bit of a fantasy as well, sort of thing. And so he, you know, he has argued this kind of crash on demand to kind of accelerate, you know, accelerationism really thing. I'm not sure about that one. There's a few things David Holmgren has come out with lately that I'm not too sure about, to say the least. But I think, you know, in that, you know, it's quite interesting, you know, do we actually behave with some kind, you know, do we just wait for the probable future to kind of play out, or do we actually focus on what's preferable and kind of bring, you know, do what we can to have some sort of, I suppose that comes down to the circles of influence and concern sort of thing. You know, we may have all these concerns about the way the world is going and what the future is looking like, but what agency can we have in our circles of influence, I guess. And also, I think it came out in the conversation there. Actually, we're talking about these as futures, but actually, I think there's two things there. I think actually, yeah, it's not going to be one or the other of these. It's actually going to be like a blend of all of these different scenarios, and they're all going, you know, it's not going to break into these four tidy little components of what the future would look like. There's actually going to be elements of all of them together, you know, and that's kind of quite inevitable. But yeah, and also I think that in a way these aren't futures. These are kind of what's happening now. These are, you know, we can see this at different stages in different places. All of these scenarios are actually unfolding now. We still have, you know, the fossil fuel driven industry is very much still with us, industrial capitalism. The green, the green tech, we are seeing more and more of the kind of green technologies starting to kind of appear, hydrogen cars. As you said there, like a lot of companies, these people are looking at the futures, the future will be these kind of green technologies, and these are starting to come online. And we're seeing rapid collapse. That's kind of happening in some places. It's particularly, some of thinking of, maybe where whole culture, whole cities are being kind of, like by war and climate refugees that are kind of happening. That's happening. That is rapid collapse, basically. That is that apocalyptic scenario kind of playing out in real time. And I think, on a slightly more hopeful note, we do have, there is kind of the managed transition. People are working towards those kind of regenerative futures. I think those ideas are kind of coming into currency. I want to kind of finish with a quote from William Gibson, who's like a science fiction author. He's written a lot of stuff around cyberpunk and all that kind of stuff. Neuromancer, I think, was one of his books. And there's a quote from William Gibson: "The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed." So we're seeing different scenarios playing out. It's not something that's in the future. It's here now. And how are things going to look in the future? I want just one last image to share. So I've talked about, there can be this kind of romance around. There's something attractive about the dystopian fiction and dystopian kind of speculative writing. There's a lot of kind of science fiction or books about the future where everything's collapsed, and there is that kind of attraction of that, like on Netflix, there'll always be filmed, things like Mad Max, or you kind of Walking Dead, the popularity of those things, post-apocalyptic views of what society will look like when, and well, I'm quite interested in, I don't know if people have heard, as an antidote to that, the solar punk school of speculative fiction. And so more people are starting to write books about actually what a positive low energy future might look like. And in the Dropbox, I've put a copy of this book here called A Dream of a Low Carbon Future. So you can look at that at your leisure. But it was actually put together by the University of Leeds. They invited contributors from like local schools and local community groups and local writers and local artists and poets to imagine kind of a positive view of a post-carbon future, low energy future. And then they collected all these stories and writings and ideas together and got some comic artists to illustrate them. So it's like a graphic novel. And it's really nice, got really beautiful artwork. And it's just looking at, this sort of society, the society of the future, where there has been kind of some climate change and global and the sea levels have risen and stuff. But, society is kind of reconfigured a little bit like Laura and Marcia was saying, people have kind of rebuilt and this kind of low carbon future. So definitely check that out. Have a look at that. Really beautiful illustrations. And because coming from Leeds, it's actually they're actually talking about a lot of people are living in the lilac communities, that Joe talked about. That's kind of the standard housing unit in this kind of imagined future. So it's quite nice to see what Joe was talking about actually feature in this book. And it's got a lot about permaculture in it and all this, that, and the other. And on the other side there, it's a compilation, like an anthology of solar punk stories, which are in the same sort of vein, this kind of positive view of what, seeing kind of a low energy future as more of an opportunity. There are challenges there, of course, but what a positive future might look like, where we're not all running around kind of killing each other and fighting over the last scraps of oil, but society is kind of reorganized. So I definitely advise checking out the whole solar punk genre. There's a lot of really hopeful and positive stuff in there. Yeah, any last comments before I close this session down? Okay, I'll stop the share. And so it's 4:10. I did there was a session I had planned. I said things might not go to plan. I had that session on the plant-based systems, which could be more of a discussion, but I'm thinking maybe rather than trying to cram that in and to give that session a bit more time, maybe we could shunt that to the next weekend, which is sort of as we discussed yesterday, a bit of an open space really. So I thought that might work better there. And that leaves us about 20 minutes, or people can go on longer if they want to, maybe check in with each other about their design stuff. Does that sound like a good way of using the last bit of time of the day? I think in the last weekend, we just kind of left it as an open-ended session and just let you folks self-organise. Nikki, do you want to?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, should we aim to have our projects finished for next time? Because were you saying like some people can present next time, some on the last weekend? I mean,
Yeah, I think that was what I think is probably the best thing to do, because I've had a couple of emails from people saying slots they prefer. I'll send out like the people familiar with the doodle poll thing, so you've got like people can kind of have. I'll put all the available slots, and then people can choose the one that works best for them over the 2 weekends, and I'll do that either late today or tomorrow or something like that. I thought that worked best than the last course we organised. People just picked the slot that worked best for them. Not everybody got the slot they wanted, but at least it kind of, was a starting point. So, and so yeah, maybe aim for having your presentation as at least some sort of presentable work in progress, even if it's not completed by maybe the next weekend. So yeah, if I just say similar to what we did on the last weekend, if it's just kind of a bit open-ended, and then people can just kind of maybe chat and share ideas. And yeah, does that sound all right? Okay. So I'll be kind of like doing stuff in the background. So I'll be kind of around, but I won't be kind of participating too much, if that's all right. And yeah, I think I'll just something to let everyone know. I've confirmed with Katie Shepherd that she's going to be with us tomorrow at 5 o'clock rather than 6 o'clock to talk about kind of permaculture and kind of permaculture applied to your own life, I guess is probably the best way of putting it. So I just want to make sure everybody knew about that. And other than that, it's kind of over to you to organise as you wish.
Did Will Bonsall ever sort out his internet?
Oh yes, yes. Sorry, that's something I do need to follow up with him. Sorry, I've kind of dropped the ball on that one a little bit, but I'll chase him up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So hopefully he's sorted it out. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be lovely to hear him.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for reminding me on that. I kind of
No worries if you can't.
Yeah, I dropped the ball on that one slightly. Yeah, I'd like to hear him as well. So okay, so I'm not sure because last time I think people just kind of wrapped up amongst themselves. I mean, I don't know if you want to do it that way or if you still want to stick to a 4:30 finish. What's the or maybe just play it by ear and see how it goes. But maybe if I just so we've kind of at least formally finished, if I do the little bell and then hand it over to you to use this space in a way that's productive.
I really want to get to some of these places. Something I'll be putting up when we set up our group will be who fancies visiting, like certainly Ian Tolhurst's place, and all these different, and the places you've been mentioning, Carla. I'd love to just go over the summer, go and spring and summer, go and visit some of these places. Something.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Actually,
Be really cool, wouldn't it?
it'd be nice. It would be lovely.
Yeah,
to
I'd be really up for
guys,
that.
or if a couple could go or something. That's a really nice idea.
Yeah.
We're all kind of far and wide, aren't we? And obviously, some of us are not even.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Sorry. That literally excluded kind of 3 out of the people here. So sorry, it wasn't the best time to discuss it.
No. It's. But that would be nice. I'm actually going to see something in the Brecon Beacons in May, which is like a forest garden. So I'm quite looking forward to that. So I've never really seen one properly. So
no, same.
Yeah. So
Do you guys know of this new vegan eco village in Wales?
No.
It's
No.
there's this Facebook group. It's called Vegan Eco Village Networking, and there's this couple that recently started one in Wales, and yeah, check it out. Let's say I might go there somewhere in the future, so I don't feel that excluded. Nikki.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, if you come over, then give us a shout. Well, so Vegan Eco Village Network.
Networking. That's the group. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And her name is Shelley Beach. So if you see a post of her, you'll recognize. And I think they're looking for visitors and volunteers. Yeah.
Sounds like us. We're on our way.
Wales is good for this stuff, isn't it?
They are, and they have the thing about Wales is they have land, which we don't have so much of in England. There's less people in Wales.
You live close to there, Dagmar?
Sorry?
You live close to Wales?
No, not at all. I live in London. So
you live in
I'm
London.
a long way, but I have woodland in Wales, so I go to Wales all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I'm hoping to eventually move there when I retire, if I ever retire. But yeah, no, it's lovely Wales. It's
I can imagine.
wet. Rains a lot. I think actually Robert Hallam started in Wales, didn't he? Nikki, Roger? No, Roger.
Oh, Roger Hallam.
Yeah, and he gave up. He was because his farm kept getting. And that's why he started XR, because his farm kept getting flooded out by all the rain.
Yeah.
Once the leaks, rotting leaks, and all that. So yeah, it is a very wet place.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go as well, actually, because I've got to cook dinner. My daughter, you don't need to hear about what I've got to do, but anyway, I think I'm going to go. But look forward to seeing you on the next weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
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 I have a question. Because my woodland is wooded, it's a forest. I don't know how many trees I need to cut down to make an actual orchard, but I don't want to cut down trees if I don't need to.
What kind of trees have you got?
There's a lot of evergreen trees in the area where I plan to plant.
And if you try to find first like invasive species and get rid of them after, like find trees that are not very native to the region and try to.
My problem is that all of the invasive species are the ones I want to keep for the birds.
But you can plant something else on.
Yeah, where I plan to plant, it's got a lot of rocks, and it's not flat, and it's on a slope, and so I want to take advantage of the slope to plant an orchard and have that sun hit there.
You have stones. It's amazing. You
A
can
lot.
build like you
A lot
can
of
build
platforms.
something and fill it like with organic matter and between, so you have like debris going. This is my dream, to have stones in my property. I have none. I have to buy it.
There's a lot of dry
Stones.
riverbeds on there, so that I can take those stones, and it's perfect. I mean, I'm very blessed.
Stones are good, aren't they? They're very useful. I'm dying to see a picture of your wood, Irene. If you've got one to share.
I have loads of them on my Facebook page, my Vegan Atlantic Facebook page.
Okay, I'm not on Facebook, but my husband is. So maybe what is it? Vegan, what's it called?
Veganic Permaculture Atlantic.
Is that your Facebook?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not my personal page. It's a page.
Okay.
I have that, and I have one called Priceless Pickings in New Brunswick, where we share swap plants and we don't pay.
Right.
As well.
So so is it mainly like conifers, or
pardon?
Is it mainly conifers that you have, or?
It's a mixed forest. The Acadian forest is actually a mixed forest, and it's got everything in there. They're from nanny berries to elder to June berries to a lot of conifers. Right. Where I plan to plant.
Because they're not very good for growing things around, are they? Because they kind of acidic and nothing really grows under them. But they're useful for making things if they're useful as wood.
And we do want to build some shelters and some picnic tables and things like that. And there is no mill on the island, so it will all be hand cut.
So maybe you need to find where the best place is to plant food, and then work from, then chop down what you need.
There's a mini area, not very big, of a little prairie with asters, wild asters growing there. That is it's not even very open. So it's really, the forest has a lot of underbrush, and it's a forest. It's a wild forest.
That's amazing. You probably don't need a massive, and maybe it doesn't all have to be in one place. Maybe you could have pockets of growing different things.
Oh, I like that idea. I'm going to write that down. Thank you. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah. You don't have to sort of clear a huge area, do you? You just have to, because actually just, even just getting rid of a couple of trees, suddenly opens up the canopy quite a lot.
They're very tall trees. It's a third succession forest, but it hasn't been cut for the last 80 years. So the trees are really quite massive.
Right. Are they quite close together?
At certain spots, but because of all of the rocks and everything, there's less. It's a beautiful forest. I just the edges have more of the plants that I want to keep for the birds. So the center really I can focus on, but I want to make sure it's on that slope where the sun is.
And you said it was coastal. You said you had the sea. It was
from a 5-minute drive to the marsh, which leads to the ocean.
Right.
What zone you're on? Like planting agricultural zone? What zone you are on?
What?
Sorry, my internet connection is very bad. What zone? Like 7? I'm in 7B.
Oh, my zone.
Do you have this?
Yes, we have zones here. I'm on a 5B.
Oh. And island is 5B too?
The whole island is 5B. It's a very small island. It's only 34 kilometers long.
It just sounds amazing. When you describe it, it just sounds so amazing.
If you Google Grand Manan Island,
I will do.
It's 34 kilometers away from Maine.
Okay, how are you spelling ground? How are you spelling that?
Grand is Grandnd.
Yeah, yeah.
It means big. And Manan, Manan, is island.
Right.
It's the native word for island.
Okay. Cool. I will have a look.
It's the big island. And there are many little islands around it that we can get to. One has a ferry going to it that we go to all the time to have picnics at. And it has the best rocks that you can collect with fossils and all kinds of different rocks there.
Are there lots of people living on the island?
It's a tiny island. There are only 900 people living on the island.
Right. Nice.
It's beautiful. It's rugged on one side, it's all cliffs, and the other side is all beaches.
Wow.
And there's one main road leading across it, and some places you can't even get to because of the cliffs, and it's this deep rocks, and it's beautiful.
That's amazing. There's nothing like that in the UK, I'm afraid. It's all, everything is just agricultural. You know,
this island, the people have small gardens. There's one person who sells at the market, and that's it. There's no gardens. There's no land development. There's one golf course, one bank, one grocery store, one which is gas stores also, and the only restaurant on the island. There's one cafe. There's 2 museums. There isn't very much on the island. It's beautiful. It's remote, and I love it.
That sounds amazing.
What are your goals for development of this property? You're gonna try to be self-sufficient, or
that's the goal.
Sell it in the market?
Yes, food production, and we are avid birders as well, my husband and I, and we bird a lot, and it's a migration route for birds. So we're there as much as we can already before we even bought the land. And so we do a lot of birding, and last summer we put our trailer there, and the birding community all came, and we had like another little camper trailer, and they would stay in that, and we would stay secluded, but they did come to visit. A lot of people came to visit our land and would walk around to see the birds, and so that's going to be part of my plan, is inviting birders to come and to observe the birds on our land, on our property as well. So that's going to be something. And I also want to work with the community, with the school, because I want to help them plan a garden, and I want to mentor teens as well, and show them different ways of doing things, arts and crafts. And I make jewelry, so we can go rock collecting and then make jewelry out of them, and like wire wrapped rocks and things like that. So there's a lot of things I can do once I get there.
Yeah, Laurie wasn't here last time. I told that I think I'm gonna abandon Earth Camp idea for my project. It's too complicated. The land that I went to, that I have, is not suitable. Actually, it's gonna be dangerous for kids to be there, because it's ticks everywhere, and they are like danger here, transmit Lyme disease, and people trying to stay away from woods in summer. And so I think I will just do like more my home land. Like We have not many. We have 0.3 acres, but we have right after when our property ends, we have ponds, and there is like land that pertains to our community, and it's undeveloped. So I was thinking to try to draw forest gardens for the community. I don't know. I'm in Alabama, so probably people will not like my idea, but at least I will try. Yeah, so change plans. I still am not abandoning like earth.
You're gone there.
I will do it in the future, but just, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you cut out there a bit.
Sorry, my internet connection isn't stable. It's always like killing me all the time. Yeah, sorry.
But you're still keeping the Earth Camp ID in your head for the future.
I camp in the future, but right now I will not be able to execute it in 1 month. So I will try to focus on this property right now, and after in the future I will do Earth Camp idea because I don't have plans for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, apologies, but I've got to go now. I've got a friend coming round in a minute. Lovely to chat to you all,
Yeah.
and look forward to seeing you next time.
See you next time.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
mm-hmm.
I just had a quick question for the two remainers. I'm looking for polycultures, to like annual polycultures. Do you have any experience or recommendations? I only know the Three Sisters, the corn, the beans, and the squashes. Besides that, Graham?
Graham?
All right.
No?
Yeah, still going. I thought when it finishes, I can stop it here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Will Bonsall, he suggests in his book, do corn and soybeans. I mean, non-GMO soybeans. And he is very like, yeah, and corn and soybeans. But for corn to be productive, it needs be quite in a large place. I can look into books that I have.
You're stuck with it.
But the only one that I could like think about right now, like he's not doing traditional tree Marias, but like other things is like all forest kind of polycultures too. So if you have like
somehow found myself in the car.
Yeah, that happens.
Graham?
This was a recipe book.
You're not on mute, Graham.
On mute.
Thank you.
okay.
So you're looking for companion plants in the annual family?
Yeah.
I don't know of any. I have to research everything.
Okay.
Laura, I will send you my sketches, what I do in my raised bed. I like research a lot of what plot with what. And that book, what is the most popular book, like tomato like scare, actually not working for me because it's like totally different growing season. I will never grow together with carrots here in Alabama. So right now I have like kale with dill and cilantro, and I see when I plant like in between, it kind of protects my kale from aphids, so it's working great. And I have like all schemes that all like planting maps that I use. I can send it to you on Facebook.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
So you would take a look what I'm planting for. Yeah. What else? Let me see. Of course, like tomatoes I plant with basil in summer. So tomato, basil, combo. I put like I have rosemary and thyme everywhere, but they are like invasive here. They grow too big. I don't recommend planting them. Like they are huge bushes right now. So
They
I
like
need
the
to do
heat,
something
probably.
about that. Yeah, they're big. Yeah, what the hell? I will send you
Only
my.
grow as annuals here. I can't keep them. They only grow as annuals.
Which rosemary?
Rosemary. Ah. Oh, he's
Rosemary.
perennial.
Yeah.
It's like people
even-
from Africa when they come to the United States and they say, "Hey, where is your pepper bush?" I'm like, "Pepper bush?" I'm like, yeah, because it's like perennial. It's perennial there, and it's like they keep it years and years and years, and we have to plant like all peppers from zero every year. Yeah. So, garlic. Right now I have like fruit trees, and I plant garlic on like beneath the trees. It's kind of protecting from disease.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is what I
Yeah.
think of.
The garlic and onions really, really protect the annuals.
Yeah, they repel a lot of small animals, right?
They're great, yeah.
Yeah.
They're great.
And mint too. A lot of people do not like mint. I love mint.
Yeah. I think mint repels slugs and snails.
And mice and spiders.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to have more perennial plants, but in the place that I'm living now, we can live here till December, and then maybe 1 year more, and then maybe 1 year more. So I can't really count on perennials. We'll have to do more annual. I think it's best to do.
And pots, I find growing in pots, you have to water them all the time.
Yeah. You mean to say if you would do it in pots, you could do perennials and take them with you? Oh yeah.
But then you have to really water them all the time.
Yeah.
I was looking into that trees that Graham mentioned, monkey puzzle. And I found out that it's like very, very common in Brazil. When it's colder climate there, it grows everywhere. It's huge, beautiful trees. Yeah, but I'm not gonna risk 30 years and try to plant something that doesn't belong in this area. I'll try to grow. I will try to grow some, like at least 50% of natives or something that will be good in Alabama. I recently learned we had huge chestnuts here before colonization, and it was providing food for local people, and they were basically extinct because some chestnuts were introduced and they spread the disease. So chestnuts that growing right now in the forest, they are very they can reach maturity to really like be productive trees. And if you Google like picture like American chestnut, huge, very, very beautiful, like bigger than very big. Like I can compare it with maybe
they're higher than homes.
Yeah.
Taller than houses.
So they're trying to make it disease resistant. Let's see.
Would any of you be interested in sharing seeds through the mail?
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. I was thinking.
I save a lot of seeds here.
Yes, I was thinking that I could, because some things we're not allowed to share. You can make paper and put them in paper, and then you can plant it.
Yeah.
Like a thicker kind of paper where you ingrain it in or something.
Mhm.
You can make paper with you just put it in the blender with water, and it makes a pulp, and then
And after that, seeds.
you make a paper, like a homemade paper, and then you put seeds in it after you finish blending it,
Blending.
and then you let it dry, and then you can send it. You can write on it, and you can send it as letter, and you can have the seeds that way.
You could like circumvent the rules so that you can send any seeds.
You can send paper.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be open to sharing. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you're on Facebook as well?
Yeah, I'm in your group also.
Which group?
Your
group.
veganic permaculture Canada.
Oh, you're on there. Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't know. Because I have my husband also lets people in, so I don't know. Sometimes I'm not the one that lets people come in to the group. Oh, thank you.
I'll add you. I'll add you personally as well.
Oh, thank you. And I'll do that too.
Are you willing to, like, do you think it's productive to work in group if we have some kind of questions in the middle of our project and want to talk to each other? Maybe we can have a Zoom meeting like before next, because I really the way we interact, and I have such a huge impact from this group. Like so many ideas, and I think it's gonna be, I would love to talk to somebody during my work. Maybe we can have like some work together on some problems on our design.
I also like that idea. Next week is going to be really heavy trying to get our plans together if we have to be done for next weekend. I don't know who's presenting first. He didn't say, but I have so
we have
much
1 month, right? Do we have 1 month?
Yeah, we have more than a month.
Oh,
still.
it's more than a month?
We have more than
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
So it's gonna be 1 month and weekend, and after another weekend.
Okay.
Like, we have 5 weeks, I think, to work.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes, I would love that. I would love to share.
Okay, I have to go. My little one is waking up.
Right.
She will be here talking.
Okay.
I'm also gonna go.
In a minute.
Okay. Goodbye, Laura. Goodbye, Natalia.
Okay.
Bye.
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 See you. Bye bye.